Chapter 1221. Anger flashed across Daiqin's face. The 30,000 cavalry couldn't hold on anymore? In his opinion, this was simply because Astral didn't want to resist and didn't want to fight head-on with the 5-star army. It was just a way to preserve his strength. Even if we can't hold on, we still have to ignore them. Daiqin snorted coldly. How could it be so easy to win without putting in any effort? Daiqin believed that even if the 30,000 cavalry met with a sudden attack, it would only be a temporary panic. As long as they stayed true to their hearts, they would be able to quickly turn the situation around. There was nothing to be worried about. What he was worried about was the fact that he didn't understand. Who were these 5-star cavalry that suddenly appeared? How many people were there? How did they appear on the west side without anyone noticing? The answer to this question was quickly revealed. This was because Tong Long had already led 4,000 cavalrymen towards the Turpan camp. Because there were already scouts keeping an eye on the situation, the moment Tong Long and the others made their move, they were immediately discovered by the scouts of the Turfan army and reported back. On the way back, they met some Turpan cavalry who were guarding the front. When they heard that someone was coming from the side, they immediately went up to meet them. On the battlefield, there was a saying that the commander's orders were not to be given out. Now that the 5-star army was right in front of them, the Turpan cavalry in charge of guarding the front couldn't just sit there and do nothing. In reality, even if they didn't meet them, Tong Long would have brought his army over. This was his important mission. Good timing. Seeing that the enemy was about to meet them, Tong Long laughed loudly. Then, with less than 4,000 men, they charged straight at the 3,000 cavalry. With the advantage in numbers and the imposing killing intent, both sides left behind many corpses and blood after just one clash. The enemy is so strong, request for reinforcements. In the same clash, the Turpan general, who had lost hundreds of cavalrymen, sensed an immense sense of danger. As he swung his saber through the air, he yelled loudly to the soldiers beside him. The personal guard turned around and rode away. Not long after, a group of 3,000 Turpan cavalrymen who were also tasked with guarding the defensive line arrived. As they left, the Turpan defense fell into a weakened state. The new army scouts who were in charge of understanding the situation shot out a signal gun into the sky. A bright red light shot into the sky, appearing so eye-catching and bright in the silent night. Let's go. In front of the new army tent, General Su He finally received the signal to act. He immediately roared and the 30,000 5-star army cavalry charged out like a pack of wolves. However, unlike before, they didn't shout. Under the heavy protection of the horses' mouths and hooves, the 30,000 cavalry charged forward like ghosts, approaching the Turpan front lines. It was only a distance of 10 li. The new army cavalry, who were prepared, only took 5 to 6 minutes to charge out. However, these 5 to 6 minutes were like torture for the Liaodong cavalry regiment. General Daiqin, who had been injured once, was very careful this time. Just the cavalry at the front of the camp alone numbered 15,000. They were split into 5 groups, each of which was 3,000 cavalry. When Tong Long brought the 4,000 cavalry and charged in, a total of 3 groups of 9,000 Turpan cavalry entered the battlefield. With double the number advantage, they quickly surrounded the Liaodong cavalry regiment. Not only that, Daiqin, who had received the news, had already called all the cavalry in the camp. He arranged for the generals to come to the camp for a meeting while ordering all the cavalry to put on their armor and get on their horses. This time, Daiqin's reaction was extremely fast. Even though he hadn't seen through the 5-star army's plan of attack, he relied on his advantage in numbers and made up his mind to take down the thousands of 5-star army cavalry that he had surrounded. General Dan, you bring 5,000 cavalry to stabilize the northern line, in case the 5-star army's main force suddenly invades. General Tong, you bring 5,000 cavalry to continue the encirclement of the 5-star army. This time, we can't let any of them escape. The other generals quickly prepare for battle and wait for the order to attack. At the same time, send someone to contact General Wu Liji and tell him to also prepare to attack the 5-star army. Daiqin quickly made a series of arrangements and the generals quickly headed out of the tent. Then, a messenger came to report that on the main battlefield, the 5-star army had indeed launched an attack. 2 groups of 6,000 cavalry were fighting with their lives on the line. They came so fast. General Daiqin's eyes flashed with surprise, but he quickly calmed down. He was confident in his cavalry. As long as they could hold on for a while, once the 5-star army was completely wiped out, he would be free to deal with the enemy at the front. At that time, with the help of the 30,000 cavalrymen from Ili, a beautiful counterattack wouldn't be a problem for them to achieve victory. At this time, on the main battlefield, the intense battle had just begun. The new army was already prepared. Under the cover of the night, they were only discovered when they were a mile away from the Turpan cavalry. Then, both sides first engaged in a battle of long-range archery. After both sides suffered casualties, the close combat battle began. On the side of the new army, the one in charge of the vanguard was the new army's 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Kulu. To be able to become the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Kulu's strength was obviously above normal commanders. This time, he was the vanguard. It could be seen that he had high hopes for him. Therefore, in the first charge, the 1st Cavalry Division fully displayed their ferocious momentum. At one point, they fiercely suppressed the 2 battalions, 6,000 Turpan cavalry, and forced them to retreat. When they gained the upper hand in the first battle and the situation was better than he had expected, he was both excited and worried. He was excited because the number of enemy cavalry was less than he had expected. He originally thought that with the strength of the Liaodong cavalry regiment, after messing up Yi Erqiang's cavalry camp, it would be good enough to attract the attention of the 2 Turpan cavalry units. Now, it seemed that the effect was even better. They actually attracted a total of 3 units. This reduced the pressure on him on the battlefield by a lot, allowing him to complete his mission better. He was excited. What he was worried about was that the Liaodong cavalry regiment, which only had 5,000 people, was surrounded by enemy cavalry several times their number. Every minute was torture. If they couldn't meet up with the enemy, they wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Attack with full force. No matter what, we have to open up a bloody path to meet up with the Liaodong cavalry division. Kulu rode on the horse and constantly observed the situation in front of him. He sent an order to the messenger beside him. Before the order was given, another cavalry scout ran over. Before the person arrived, his voice was already loud. Division commander, the Turpan cavalry has increased. 5,000 cavalry are coming towards us. 5,000 cavalry are going to the left flank. What? Hearing the Turpan cavalry's quick reaction, Kulu's face became a little ugly. The enemy's quick reaction obviously increased the difficulty of the following plan. Narrowing his eyes, Kulu quickly suppressed the nervousness in his heart. After forcing himself to calm down, he suddenly shouted, "Men, inform the first captain, Wu Ba, to go and rescue the first unit of the Liaodong cavalry regiment. In short, even if you have to use your body, you have to create a way out for me." The 1st Regiment commander Wu Ba, as his name suggested, was abnormally tall and sturdy. He weighed no less than 80 kilograms, and his body was 8 feet tall, 1.84 meters tall. Logically speaking, this kind of weight wasn't suitable for cavalry. This was because the problem of weight would inevitably increase the burden on the warhorse. However, Wu Ba was tall and agile. Later on, he was specially recruited to be a member of the cavalry. Because of his size, his warhorse was also specially allocated, and belonged to the very tall category. At the same time, Wu Ba was also a subordinate that Kulu admired very much. At the time, he was the 1st Regiment commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. This time, Kulu sent him to reinforce the reinforced regiment. This was enough to prove that he valued this ally very much. The moment Kulu gave the order, the other officers from the division headquarters were all stunned. One of them said with a face of worry, "Wu Ba is leading the main force of our 1st Cavalry Division. Now, there are still 5,000 Turpan cavalry coming at us. Why don't we send other regimental commanders to rescue the reinforced regiment?" "Other regiments? Who's up to the task?" Kulu asked without any explanation. Then, he shook his head and said, "This division commander knows what you are thinking. With Wu Ba gone, the pressure on us will definitely increase. However, this division commander still has to do this. When we came here, the division commander gave an absolute order that the reinforced regiment must be rescued. They are risking their lives for us. If something really happens, how will others look at us? How will Bugnam of Gojoseon look at us?" After asking a few questions in one breath, Kulu saw that the other officers seemed to have something to say. He directly waved his hand and said, "All right, this division commander's orders cannot be changed. If you have any objections, you can convey them to the division commander after the battle." On the battlefield, the division commander had the final say. It was precisely because of this that the morale of the army could be guaranteed. As for whether there would be different opinions on the battlefield, that would be decided by the division commander. Since Kulu had said this, even if the other officers had different opinions, they could only obey. After giving this order, Kulu's gaze involuntarily turned towards the Ili camp on the other side. According to the battle plan formulated by the new army, the Liaodong Cavalry Reinforced Regiment was responsible for messing up the Yarqiang camp and charging towards the Turpan camp. The 1st Cavalry Division was responsible for attacking the Turpan camp from the front. These plans revolved around one goal, and that was to create an opportunity for the other 3 cavalry divisions of the new army to attack the Ili camp. Chapter 12:22. Since it was an allied army, the most important thing was the alliance. If this alliance could be broken, the 3 allied armies would become 3 isolated armies. At that time, the 5-star armies would be able to attack whoever they wanted to attack when faced with their weakened enemies. Breaking the alliance naturally became the most important issue. After the discussion, the new 3 armies set their sights on their old rival, the 30,000 cavalrymen of Yi Libao. The reason why they chose them was because they were the closest to Baiming. If they attacked from there, they wouldn't have to worry about enemies suddenly appearing. Secondly, they had defeated the Ili cavalry before. They knew the strength of the 5-star army. With this shadow, they would have a higher chance of defeating them. That's right, defeating them, not defeating them. Rather than injuring 10 fingers, the new 3rd army would rather lose some soldiers and horses. This time, they wanted to deal a heavy blow to Yi Li's 30,000 cavalrymen. Only then would they be able to defeat the so-called allied army. It had to be known that not long ago, the 1st Cavalry Division had taken over Hobok Seli City. It was equivalent to cutting off the Ili cavalry's retreat to the north. If they heavily injured the Ili cavalry here, they would definitely become very obedient. When they couldn't even take care of themselves, the so-called allied army would collapse on its own. Just as Kulu was looking at the Ili cavalry camp, the new army's commander Su He was leading 3 cavalry divisions to surround the Ili cavalry division. Relying on the concealment of the horses' hooves and mouths, when the 3 cavalry divisions suddenly appeared in front of the Ili cavalry camp, it gave Wuli Ji a big fright. When the flames in the west reached the sky, he had already gotten out of bed. He put on his armor and began to gather the troops. Following that, news spread that the 5-star army had begun to break through the enemy and attack the Turpan cavalry camp. When he received this news, Wuli Ji's heart was sweeter than honey. In his eyes, the situation was very clear. This time, the 5-star army's target was definitely Turpan and Yarqiang. He could stay out of it and watch it all as a bystander. Just now, General Daiqin sent someone to ask for help. Of course, he agreed, but he didn't send a single soldier. From the bottom of his heart, it was true that the 5-star army was his enemy, but what about the Turpan kingdom? Wouldn't it be great to be able to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight? Wouldn't it be great to be able to reap the benefits while the two enemies fought? He wasn't stupid enough to immediately send troops to help Turpan. Of course, due to their relationship as allies, he would definitely send out his troops. However, he had to grasp the timing well. He had to wait until the Turfan army could no longer hold on before he made his move. This way, he would be able to deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army and also gain the reputation of saving the Turfan army. Wouldn't it be the best of both worlds? Wuli Ji had fought with the 5-star army before and even attacked the first city with the Wara. He was much clearer about the strength of the 5-star army compared to the other two countries. This was an opponent that wasn't to be trifled with. They were well equipped and their soldiers were well trained. How could such an opponent be defeated so easily? It wasn't too late to wait for his allies to exhaust the strength of the 5-star army before he made his move. Let's fight, the more intense the better. In the end, the winner will only be us. Wuli Ji grinned and let out a laugh. However, this laughter didn't last long. Soon, a scout appeared in front of him and said with a panicked expression. The 5-star army suddenly came and had already clashed with the cavalry at the first line of defense. However, because the enemy had too many people, the front line couldn't hold on much longer. What? How is this possible? When Wuli Ji heard this news, he stood there as if he was petrified. He didn't move for more than 10 breaths of time. It wasn't until the deputy beside him reminded him that he came back to his senses. Then, he walked towards the high platform in the middle of the camp. He wanted to see with his own eyes how many soldiers and horses the 5-star army had sent. It would have been better if he didn't take a look. Now that he took a look, he saw that under the night sky, there were flashing torches everywhere. He could hear the sounds of charging and killing. He felt that the enemy's cavalry wasn't less than his. 30,000 against 30,000, and they were completely unprepared. Wuli Ji could already guess the outcome of the battle. Because of this, he had a frightened expression on his face. After he came down from the high platform, he sent soldiers to stop the 5-star army from approaching. At the same time, he ordered people to ask General Dai Qin for help. In front of the Turfan tent, Dai Qin couldn't sit still anymore. He was currently in front of the tent observing the situation outside. Because of the moonlight, other than the sounds of killing and the movement of the torches, he couldn't see any useful information. However, he still didn't move. He believed that as long as he sat on the horse, it would be a symbol. As long as the soldiers saw him, they wouldn't panic and their morale would increase greatly. Dai Qin, who had a mighty aura, was like a door god, unmoving like a mountain. It indeed gave the nearby Turfan cavalry a boost in morale. Many of them became braver because of this. They just wanted to perform better in front of the general. Although it was night time and their performance might not be seen by the general, many of them still held on to a fluke mentality and continued to do so. Not long later, good news came continuously. The 5-star army that came from the west was completely surrounded and could be destroyed at any time. The 5-star army's main force that came from the front was also blocked outside. Other than a few 2,000 war horses that managed to charge through the defensive circle, the rest of the 5-star army cavalry were blocked outside. Good. This news caused Dai Qin to be overjoyed. To be able to completely destroy a 5-star army, this was definitely a great achievement. When the king found out, he would definitely be heavily rewarded. At the same time, it would be a heavy blow to the 5-star army. It would let them know that the Turfan kingdom wasn't a pushover. Just as he was in a good mood, the young general that Wuli Ji sent to ask for help came in front of Dai Qin. The moment he saw Dai Qin, he knelt on the ground and begged, "General, our camp is being attacked by the 5-star army. Please send reinforcements because we are allies." "Oh? This news first made Daiqin's entire body tremble. Then, his expression froze. However, after a few breaths of time, his face blossomed with an unnoticeable smile. "This young general, you said that your camp is being attacked by the 5-star army, but how many enemies are there?" So many, I can't even count." Hearing this, the young general raised his head and said in panic. However, in Daiqin's eyes, he mistakenly thought that the panic was because the general was scared of him. Even if Wu Liji was trying to deceive him, he shouldn't have sent someone more mature. Thus, he coldly snorted and said, "All right, this general already knows about this matter. Please go back and tell Wu Liji that reinforcements will be arriving soon." "Yes, thank you, General Daiqin." The young general let out a sigh of relief, as if he had completed an important mission. He hurriedly bowed and left. After the young general left, the other Turfan generals couldn't help but ask, "General, are you really going to send reinforcements?" "Send what?" "When we asked for reinforcements, they didn't send a single soldier." "What bullshit 5-star army's main force attacking, it's clearly an excuse not to send reinforcements." "Humph, whatever, we don't need to care about them. With our current strength, we can completely take the credit. We don't need other people's help." Daiqin completely misunderstood. Of course, he couldn't be blamed for this. Who would have thought that the 5-star army's plan was to create a diversion? Furthermore, they first attacked Yarqiang Kingdom, then Turfan. Would they really attack Ili in the end? No one would believe that the pitiful Wu Liji would have to face the attacks of the new army alone. From the start of the new army's attack, it was extremely ferocious. In their hearts, they were clear that to create this opportunity, they had completely sacrificed the Liaodong cavalry regiment's benefits. Since their allies were willing to help them, they obviously couldn't just watch them die. This required them to increase the speed of their attacks. First, they had to heavily injure Ili, then they would be free to deal with Turofan's main force. Naturally, there was another important reason. That was, no one dared to say whether Turfan would suddenly send reinforcements to help Xiao Ili's main force. If they really did that, then they would truly be in danger. With these two main reasons, the new army's 3 main cavalry divisions, from the moment they started attacking, they were like brave giants. Anyone who dared to block their path would only have one result, death. Without any preparation, facing the fierce attacks of the 5-star army, the Turfan army was forced to retreat step by step. At this time, Wu Liji made an even more wrong decision. That was, he didn't send his entire army forward at once. Instead, he sent out 2,000 to 3,000 cavalry at once. He wanted to stop the attacks of the 5-star army. He wanted to leave behind enough troops to wait for the cavalry from Turfan Kingdom to join forces with them to counterattack the 5-star army. It was impossible for reinforcements to come. After the battle lasted for more than an hour, Wu Liji finally understood this point clearly. Less than half of his 30,000 cavalrymen were left after this battle. "I can't wait any longer." Seeing that the reinforcements from Turfan still hadn't arrived, Wu Liji's eyes flashed with anger. The distance between the two camps was only 5 li. If they rushed at full speed, they would arrive in an instant. However, after such a long time, not to mention a large batch of reinforcements, there wasn't even a shadow of reinforcements. At this moment, Wu Liji had completely lost his confidence. Chapter 12:23. Hearing Wu Liji say that they couldn't wait any longer, the other generals beside him all rubbed their palms together. They didn't have any history or experience fighting against the 5-star army. In their short-sighted eyes, it seemed that their Ili cavalry was the most tyrannical force under the heavens. They even yearned to fight against the 5-star army and obtain military merits. However, it was clear that they misunderstood Wu Liji's words. When he said that they couldn't wait any longer, it wasn't that he wanted to fight to the death with the 5-star army, but rather that he was prepared to retreat. If it wasn't Turpan's capital behind him, but Ili country's capital, Wu Liji would fight to the death. However, now wasn't the time to use his full strength. Since this battle was destined to be lost, what he needed to do was to bring more cavalry back and protect Ili country. Pass on the order. Wu Liji spat out these two words like a popping bean. Following this, the young generals beside him all became excited. What Er said next made these people's fighting spirit fall into a bottomless abyss. Pass down the order to retreat. Retreat? A young general thought that he had misheard and asked with a doubtful tone. Yes, retreat. We don't need to fight to the death with the 5-star army in order to protect Turpan's capital. Now, I order the entire army to retreat. Not only did Wu Liji decide to retreat, but he also decided to withdraw from this so-called alliance. He could see that everyone wasn't of one mind. Whenever they encountered a situation, they would only protect themselves and fight for themselves. What was the use of this alliance? What was the point of this alliance? Although doing this would cause the Turpan army to fall into danger, and even Turpan's capital behind them would be in the same situation. At the same time, it could affect the overall situation of the three countries' alliance. However, Wu Liji didn't think so much at this moment. If he insisted on staying, it was very likely that he would be completely surrounded by the 5-star army, or even be completely wiped out. This was a responsibility that he couldn't bear. Wu Liji decisively gave the order to retreat. Without waiting for the new army's main force to surround them, the front army turned around and fled. This caused the new army to lose a chance to wipe them out. Motherf *Ker, he runs really fast. Why don't we chase after him? The 3rd Cavalry Division's commander, Lei Chuandang, spoke with a displeased expression. He was in the middle of a killing spree when the enemy fled. They didn't even bring any food or military supplies with them. More than 10,000 captives were left inside and outside the tent. This was enough to prove his determination. There's no need for that. Commander Su, he shook his head. A cornered beast would still put up a desperate fight. At this time, if they really caught up with Li's cavalry, they would have no way to retreat. If Li went all out, it was very likely that both sides would suffer. This was not what he wanted. Not to mention that the 1st Cavalry Division and the Liaodong Cavalry Regiment were in danger, especially the latter. Su He had to be saved. Su He had done so much for him, so it was reasonable for him to do his best to help. 4th Division, leave 2 regiments to clean up the battlefield. The rest of you, follow me and charge into the Turpan camp. When they heard that there was a big battle to fight, the other 3 division commanders' eyes lit up. They immediately replied, "Yes, sir." The Liaodong Cavalry Regiment. At this time, they were completely surrounded. As the first to charge out, Tong Long was covered in blood. Most of it was the enemy's, and some of it was his own. Since he suddenly appeared in the battle with Yi Erqiang, Tong Long hadn't stopped killing for a moment. Just the number of enemy cavalry who died in his hands was at least 60 to 70. There were even more who were injured. This fully demonstrated his reputation as a fierce general of Liaodong. However, at the same time, he also paid a big price. For example, of the 4,000 cavalry that charged out with him, there were now less than 500 left. Moreover, all of them were injured. Some were only holding on with their last breath. Even if their injuries were healed, it was impossible for them to gallop on horseback. After paying such a huge price, the results were satisfactory. Not only did they break through the camp of Yi Erqiang's 30,000 cavalrymen and force them to retreat, they also attracted the attention of 11,000 cavalrymen from the Turf Kingdom. Furthermore, they were able to keep a close eye on them, preventing them from being distracted. Facing 11,000 with 4,000, and being surrounded, Tong Long wasn't made of iron. The cavalry he brought weren't all as brave as he was. During this period of time, there were 2 huge dangers. However, one of them was blocked by Zhao Xing and the remaining 1,000 cavalry. When the second danger came, the new Army 1st Cavalry Division's 1st Regiment commander, Wu Ba, brought 2,000 cavalry and blocked it. With the appearance of 2 reinforcements, the pressure on Tong Long decreased by a lot. Just as they were about to charge out and kill their way out, another 3,000 Turpan cavalry came and joined the encirclement. At this point, Tong Long had already restrained 14,000 Turpan cavalry. This was already more than a third of Daiqin's forces. Another 3,000 cavalry surrounded them. No matter if it was Tong Long, Zhao Xing, or Wu Ba, their faces all became ugly. After exchanging glances, they all raised their heads and laughed out loud. Good, since that's the case, let's fight to the death. At most, we'll be men again in 18 years. Tong Long's wild laughter sounded so heroic and heroic in the night. That's right. 18 years later, we'll be heroes again. But even if we die, we can't let our enemies have an easy time. Next, let's see who kills more people. Leader Wu Ba also had a crazed smile on his face. This time, he brought a whole 2,000 cavalry over. However, there were less than 100 people left by his side. According to the rules of the army, when an army lost more than half of its members, they should retreat from the battlefield. However, his entire army was almost wiped out. Seeing the soldiers who had followed him for so many years leaving one after another, Wu Ba only had one thought in his mind, and that was to avenge his fallen comrades. He wanted to kill as many people as he could. Only then would he have the face to see his comrades who had left before him after he went to the Yellow Springs. Let's fight, who's afraid of who? Zhao Xing, who was the weakest in terms of personal strength but also had the guts, also roared. This was completely different from his usual scholarly side. From this, it could be seen that the cruel and bloody battlefield could change a person. Zhao Xing wasn't much better off. Of the last 1,000 cavalry he brought, there were less than 200 left. Luckily, because he joined the battle late, he only had a blade wound on his body. The 3 generals looked at the enemies surrounding them. At this moment, they no longer cared about life and death. In their eyes, there was only one word: revenge. At this point, the Turpan army wasn't much better off. Of the 14,000 troops, there weren't even half left. However, there were still over 5,000 people left. The ones surrounding them were still the few hundred 5-star army who were on the verge of death. They still held a significant advantage. General Tong, who was in charge of surrounding the 5-star army, stared with his eyes wide open. He was truly shocked by the performance of Tong Long and the others. He originally thought that with several times the number of the enemy and the fact that they were surrounded, it shouldn't be a problem to deal with the enemy. However, after fighting for so long, not only did he suffer heavy losses, he even suffered more than the enemy. This made him feel extremely humiliated. Now that he saw the enemy still shouting while surrounded, how could he let it go? He immediately pointed his saber forward and shouted, "Go, kill them all, kill them all. Kill!" General Tong was angry. The cavalry below took advantage of the fact that they had more people. After a loud shout, they all charged forward. At this moment, swords flashed and war horses galloped forward. A life-and-death battle was once again played out. Relying on the advantage of numbers, a 5-star army cavalry would often have to face 3 to 4 enemies or even more. In such a situation, death was inevitable. The only difference was how many enemies they could kill. With the thought that killing one was enough and killing 2 was worth it, the 5-star army cavalry soldiers didn't care about life and death. With the determination to fight to the death, they didn't defend and launched a final attack on the Turpan cavalry. Their morale was still high and they waved their sabers resolutely. But after all, they weren't made of iron. After using up most of their strength, the sabers in their hands gradually lost control. Even the horses under their butts were letting out muffled snorts. That was a sign that they were about to use up all their strength and were about to lose all their strength. However, at this moment, no one cared so much. When all the soldiers were prepared to die, in their eyes, death was no longer that scary. In their eyes, there was only killing the enemy. Only killing the enemy. In the face of death, the hundreds of soldiers of the 5-star army burst forth with their greatest potential. Many of them weren't killed by the Turpan cavalry, but by the exhaustion of their bodies. In the end, they couldn't even ride their horses and fell to the ground, unconscious. Among them was Commander Tong Long. When he launched the counterattack, he was the one who took the lead. Relying on his own bravery, he swung his saber almost instinctively, cutting down 4 sturdy Turkmen cavalrymen. When he swung his saber for the 5th time, due to the decrease in speed, it was finally blocked. Under the powerful rebound force, he lost his balance and fell off his warhorse. Commander! Tong Long's fall from his horse attracted the shouts of more than 10 soldiers who saw this scene. This shout also greatly stimulated the other 5-star army cavalry soldiers. They charged forward as if they had gone mad. Some of them didn't even have the strength to hold their sabers, but they still used their bodies to open up a path of blood. It was all for the sake of protecting Tong Long, who they didn't know whether he was dead or alive, from being trampled and killed by the Turpan cavalry. However, there was a limit to their madness, especially when they didn't have the strength to do so. As more and more 5-star army cavalry fell to the ground, the encirclement of the Turpan cavalry became smaller and smaller. In the end, Wu Ba and Zhao Xing were surrounded in an extremely small area with less than 50 cavalry soldiers. Chapter 12:24. Those who surrender will be spared. General Tong was also shocked by the reaction of these people before they died. Although they were enemies, he had to admit that this was an opponent worthy of respect. This was because in less than an hour, he had lost another 1,000 cavalrymen. This made him furious, but at the same time, he also secretly admired Lu Xian. Surrender? Ha ha ha, our 5-star army only has heroes who die in battle, not cowards who kneel. Wu Ba seemed to have heard the funniest joke in the world. After laughing wildly, he waved his heavy right arm and pointed forward. 5-star army soldiers, prepare for the final attack. It was indeed the final attack. Because everyone knew that with only 50 of them, they would not be able to change the outcome of the battle. This final attack was the time for them to show their worth as soldiers. Wu Ba's heroism caused General Tong's expression to change again. But soon, his eyes flashed with a murderous intent. Although he admired these 5-star troops and admitted that they were indeed brave warriors, he still had to kill them because they were serving their own masters. This was the duty of a soldier. Everyone, get ready to charge. The battle was about to start. There was no doubt about the outcome. With 4,000 soldiers fighting 50 cavalrymen, and 50 cavalrymen covered in wounds, there was no doubt about the outcome. Wu Ba and General Tong raised their sabers. At the same time, Wu Ba and General Tong did the same thing. The night breeze seemed to sound the horn for the final charge. The sabers of the two generals fell at the same time, and all the cavalry prepared for the final charge at the same time. Xiao xiao xiao. Xiao xiao xiao, right at this moment, the sound of arrows piercing through the air rang out. Then, from the periphery of the battlefield, behind the Turpan army, came a series of battle cries. The sound of horse hooves stomping on the ground reverberated into everyone's ears. The new army cavalry reinforcements had finally arrived. It was the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Lei Chuandang. This irascible and loud general was also very brave. The moment he appeared behind the Turpan cavalrymen, he started killing them. A huge hole was easily torn open by him. You guys follow me to block them. The rest of you, kill these people. Kill them. At this moment, General Tong was also infuriated. 14,000 men against only half of the enemy. Yet, there was still no result after so long. This made him feel humiliated and angry at the same time. At this moment, he didn't give the order to retreat. Even if he were to die, he wanted to kill off the 5-star army that gave him a headache and made him respect them. Protect the leader. When the 50 cavalrymen heard the battle cries outside, they couldn't help but tremble. A wave of energy instantly filled their bodies. They then formed an encirclement, surrounding Wu Ba, Zhao Xing, and Commander Tong Long, whose fate was unknown. Kill. Arrow formation, charge with me. Lei Chuandang had completely forgotten that as a divisional commander, he couldn't rashly enter the battlefield. Thinking of his comrades, he brandished his massive saber and descended like a god of death. None of the Turkmen soldiers who stood in his way could withstand a single blow from him. Lei Chuandang was the tip of the arrow, and in a short period of time, he killed his way out. Coincidentally, he ran into General Tong, who was just as angry. When two kings met, there was only one person left. Without saying a word, the two of them immediately started fighting. Lei Chuandang's moves were grand. His saber, which was wider than a normal saber, was wielded with vigor. General Tong, who was favored by General Dai Qin, wasn't a good-for-nothing. He used his curved saber with great dexterity, always using 4 ounces of force to deflect Lei Chuandang's huge force and looking for an opportunity to counterattack. On the surface, the two of them were evenly matched, and it would be difficult to determine the victor in a short period of time. However, only General Tong himself knew how much pressure he was facing at this moment. Every time his curved saber clashed with Lei Chuandang's saber, his arm couldn't help but tremble. After a while, the area between his thumb and index finger that was holding the saber was already dripping with blood. Let go. Lei Chuandang, who was anxious to save his comrades, didn't hesitate to use his strength. Another ferocious slash, like a tiger descending the mountain, clashed with General Tong's curved saber. Just as he said, the other party's curved saber trembled and fell to the ground. Succeeding in one strike, Lei Chuandang didn't hold back and swung his saber again. General Tong, who had lost his weapon, quickly dodged and fled. If it was under normal circumstances, he might have been able to dodge. However, he was on a war horse. He dodged to the side, and the war horse didn't have the ability to do so. With one strike, the war horse fell to the ground, and General Tong also fell to the ground. Kill. Following closely behind Lei Chuandang, the cavalry of the 5-star army in the arrow formation immediately spurred their horses and walked past him. General Tong managed to dodge the first and second slash, but he didn't manage to dodge the third and fourth slash. Just as he got up from the ground, he was turned into a target by the 5-star army's cavalry. His body was cut beyond recognition, and he died with blood all over his body. Lei Chuandang didn't care whether General Tong was dead or alive. He had confidence in his comrades behind him. At this moment, his attention was completely focused on the front. He still had to save his comrades. Even if there was only a 1% chance, he had to give it his all. Charging with all his strength, a huge opening appeared in front of him. Lei Chuandang finally reached the center of the encirclement in the shortest time possible. When he arrived, he saw 6 cavalry in the uniform of the 5-star army. They were all covered in blood, and their faces looked as if they were ready to die. "Good brother, I'm late." When he saw that there were only 6 cavalry, Lei Chuandang, a hot-blooded man, couldn't help but cry. Although he didn't experience it personally, he could feel how difficult and dangerous this battle was. Commander Lei, you're finally here." Wu Ba, who was riding on his horse, chuckled. It was a smile of satisfaction, a smile of relief after completing a mission. Because of this, he breathed his last breath and fell to the ground from his horse. "Quick, save them." Zhao Xing, who was beside Wu Ba, immediately shouted. Following that, a group of shouts and shouts resounded in the encirclement. Lei Chuandong's appearance not only saved Wu Ba, Zhao Xing, and the others, but also defeated the remaining 4,000 Turpan cavalry. When they had the advantage in numbers, they still didn't win. Now that the reinforcements of the 5-star army had arrived and General Tong was dead, the rest of them didn't have the courage to stay here. They immediately scattered like birds and beasts, fleeing in all directions. In comparison, the main force of Turfan was not having a good time either. Commander Su He brought the entire 2nd Cavalry Division and 2 regiments of the 4th Cavalry Division. More than 10,000 cavalrymen charged into Turufan's main camp from the east like a flood of steel. General Dai Qin, who was waiting for good news from the north and west, didn't expect enemies to appear from the east. For a moment, he was stunned on the spot. Isn't the eastern front guarded by Wuli Ji and 30,000 Ili cavalry? Then why would these enemies appear here? Thinking back to when the Ili cavalry asked him for help, he suddenly understood. Could it be that the request for help wasn't an act, but real? If that was the case, then where did the 5-star army get so many cavalry to be able to defeat Yi Erqiang's cavalry and the Ili cavalry? How did they have the strength to attack him? At this moment, the 5-star army became mysterious in General Dai Qin's eyes. Such a result made him believe without a doubt that the main force of the 5-star army had arrived. It could even be Bugnam of Gojoseon himself. Otherwise, with the new army's 30,000 cavalry, how could they injure him to this extent? General Dai Qin, who thought he understood everything, cursed each and every one of the scouts in his heart. He always thought that these scouts had the wrong information, which led to the current defeat. But he didn't know that Yang Chendong's army was still 100 miles away. To reach here, it would take at least a day. It was also because of this wrong judgment that Dai Qin didn't even bother with the 5-star army that appeared in the east. Instead, he directly gave the order to retreat. Actually, he still had close to 20,000 cavalry. If he counterattacked now, it was very possible that he could defeat Su He's new army. But the shadow of his previous defeat was too big in Dai Qin's heart. It was so big that he had lost the courage to fight head-on. Dai Qin gave the order to retreat. He only left 5,000 cavalry to stop the 5-star army's advance. Because behind him was the Turpan capital, he needed time to retreat to inform King Hardenbarter. The king also needed time to retreat. The scout general galloped towards the capital. He did not shout as he galloped on the streets of the capital. He was worried that the news of the army's defeat would spread to the city and cause chaos in the city. This would be even more detrimental to the king's departure. In the palace, Hardenbarter already knew about the battle outside the city. He had already put on his king's clothes and was waiting for the news. He didn't expect that the news of the defeat would come. If it wasn't for the fact that the throne was wide enough, he probably would have fallen off the throne. How did we lose? Isn't Bugnam of Gojoseon still 100 miles away? Isn't there only the 5-star army outside? After calming himself down, Hardenbarter asked the question that was bothering him the most. My king, Bugnam of Gojoseon has appeared. We weren't prepared. The Yarqiang and Ili kingdoms' cavalry have all retreated. General Dai Qin can't do this alone. The scout told Hardenbarter what Dai Qin meant. What? After hearing that his allies had retreated and that Bugnam of Gojoseon had appeared, Hardenbarter knew that he had lost again. It was a huge loss. A huge loss that would leave the capital behind. Seeing that Hardenbarter was still in a daze, the scout anxiously said, Your Majesty, General Dai Qin probably won't be able to hold on for long. Please leave the capital, Your Majesty. Chapter 1225. Yes, leave this place immediately, leave this place. Even though he was unwilling, Hardenbarter didn't want to be a captive. If he lost the capital, he could still take it back. However, if he was captured by the 5-star army, there would be no chance for him to make a comeback. Luckily, he was prepared. When the scouts entered the city at night, they didn't make a big fuss. When Harden Barter left the capital, he wasn't stopped at all. However, due to the lack of time, he left a lot of good things in the palace. He was even worried that if he made a ruckus, the civilians would hear the news and come out to escape. As such, he didn't even have the courage to burn those things. Outside of Turpan City, Dai Qin and his cavalry fought as they retreated. They managed to hold on until dawn. After receiving news that the king had left the city safely, they took the remaining 20,000 cavalry and escaped. Because Dai Qin's forces were the last to be attacked, they didn't lose much. They only lost a lot when they surrounded the Liaodong cavalry regiment. In fact, at this time, the strength of the new Third Army had decreased by a lot. After a night of fighting, they had lost almost a cavalry division. Among them, Wu Ba's regiment suffered the most. Less than 400 of them survived from the loss of 2,000 men. Half of them were seriously injured and would have to withdraw from the army even if they recovered. Needless to say, the Liaodong cavalry regiment was even worse. When the casualties were counted, some of their injured brothers were dug out from the pile of corpses. Even so, less than 500 of their 5,000 brothers were left. 90% of their strength was damaged, and they were almost beaten to a pulp. Of course, after paying such a huge price, it wasn't like they didn't gain anything. On the contrary, they gained a lot. The most direct result was that they took down Turpan City. Occupying this place meant that they had the foundation and strength to rule everywhere. Secondly, there were many good things in the palace that had been taken by the 5-star army for their own use. Their initial estimated value was around 5 million taels of silver, which was enough to make up for all the losses of the 5-star army in this battle. Not to mention, most of the civilians in the city were also trapped by the 5-star army. When they woke up, they were still Turkmen, but when they woke up, they were already captives of the Baiming army. After a bitter battle, they managed to capture over 20,000 people and tens of thousands of war horses. Among them were the 5,000 war horses that Dai Qin had given to Wu Liji under pressure. Because Wu Liji was in a hurry to escape, they were all captured by the 5-star army. With less than 40,000 cavalrymen, they managed to defeat 100,000 cavalrymen of the Alliance army. This was no small miracle. When Yang Chendong received the battle report on his way here, he couldn't help but smile. Very good, the new army is good, the Liaodong cavalry is even better. Men, tell everyone to hurry up and get to Turpan as soon as possible. This was not because Yang Chendong wanted to see the fruits of victory earlier. He was worried that once the three allied forces found that their opponents were less than 40,000 people after daybreak, and the number of people after a hard battle was only more than 20,000, they would suddenly counterattack. If so, everything they had obtained before was likely to be lost. Yang Chendong's worry wasn't without reason. For example, Aleifu of the Yarqiang kingdom also had such thoughts. He even sent people to contact Dai Qin and Wu Liji to discuss whether or not they should attack during the day when the 5-star army wasn't stable yet. However, he was mercilessly rejected. Last night, as the first Yarqiang tribe to be attacked, Aleifu of the Yarqiang tribe did feel like he was beaten senseless. Especially after the death of his deputy general, when the morale of the army fell to the lowest point, he immediately made preparations to escape. After running for dozens of li and confirming that there were no pursuers behind him, Aleifu smelled a trace of abnormality. Logically speaking, he had already lost. If it was him, he would definitely bring his troops and attack. There was no reason for him to let them go. However, the 5-star army didn't chase after him. What did this mean? There were only two answers. First, the 5-star army didn't place him in their eyes. Second, the 5-star army's strength was insufficient and they couldn't chase after him. As for the first answer, if the 5-star army didn't place the 30,000 cavalry in their eyes, he wouldn't believe it no matter what. Then it seemed that there was only the second answer. For this reason, he hurriedly sent out close to 100 scouts to gather information. Very quickly, the news came back. The 5-star army's strength was indeed insufficient and they were surrounded by the Turpan cavalry. When he heard this news, Alefu had an impulse to lead his troops back and deal a heavy blow to the 5-star corps that was looking for trouble with him. He wanted to let them know how stupid it was to provoke him. However, this thought was fleeting. He was thinking of another problem. Once the 5-star army was defeated, the Yarkiang tribe's greatest enemy would be the Turpan kingdom. Since there was such an opportunity, why not sit back and watch the tigers and dragons fight while he reaped the benefits? Due to his selfishness, Alefu only ordered people to pay close attention to the situation on the battlefield. He himself walked at a steady pace. He wanted to wait for both sides to consume more of their strength. Then, he would appear as the savior and turn the tide. However, Alefu didn't expect that Wuxia Ji would also be defeated. When he heard from the scouts that the 5-star army had defeated the Yilabali army and launched a fierce attack on the Turpan cavalry, he hurriedly fled. Using a saying from the future, it wasn't that he was useless, but that the opponent was too cunning and too strong. However, no matter what, Alefu's 30,000 troops didn't suffer any heavy losses. Even last night, he only lost a deputy general and less than 1,000 cavalry. Furthermore, those cavalry were mostly injured from trampling on each other. This meant that out of the 3 armies, Alefu was the strongest. It was precisely because of this that he made the request to counterattack. Because from all the signs, it seemed like the 5-star army wasn't that strong. When they could fight, they didn't fight. When they couldn't fight, Alefu wanted to fight. Facing this request, Daiqin directly rejected it. As for Wuxia Ji, he had escaped to God knows where last night. Without any helpers, Alefu decided to leave after an intense mental struggle. He didn't want to take the risk. More importantly, this risk wasn't worth it at all. If he really defeated the 5-star army and took back the Turpan capital, what could he do? Now was the time for the 3 armies to form an alliance. Could he still occupy their capital and not return it? In the end, Alefu could only return. This made General Su He, who had been watching them from the city tower, let out a sigh of relief. They had just taken over the city. Now, the city was still very chaotic, and there were even many opposing forces. One had to say that Turpan's foundation was still very strong. Especially those retired soldiers. They didn't die and were mixed in with the civilians. For such experienced veterans, once they were given weapons and had a leader, they would quickly become a very strong force and pose a threat to the 5-star army. With internal problems, Su He didn't want to have any more conflicts with the Yarkiang army. After seeing Alefu retreat, Su He let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, he said to his 4 division commanders, "Clean up the city, kill those who oppose. Try some of the prisoners, punish those who are guilty and release those who are innocent. Spread the news of the 5-star army publicly, dividing the land to stabilize the morale of the army. Educate the prisoners, if they have relatives in the city, make use of them and try to make them work for us. Calculate the resources obtained from the war, unify them and look after them strictly. Clean up the palace and prepare for the arrival of the king." A series of orders were given out by Su He. The machine that was the new army started to operate quickly. Everyone was 100% focused. Even though many people were tired after fighting for a night, when they thought about the arrival of Bugnam of Gojoseon, they were full of energy again. A day later, the scouts and light cavalry of the new army arrived at Turpan. Su He, who had been worried about a counterattack, was relieved. On the morning of the 3rd day, Yang Chendong brought 20,000 Mongolian soldiers and the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division to Turpan. After more than a day of preparations, the security situation in the city had become much more stable. After a series of orders were issued, especially after the public policy of distributing land was implemented. The Turpan people who were originally worried about not having enough food to eat and clothes to wear in the future were much calmer. As a result, more than 3,000 people came to inquire about the situation. Perhaps they wanted to ask about it themselves, or perhaps it was their friends and neighbors who wanted to ask about it. For these people's questions, Suhi specially sent people to set up a temporary problem-solving department to be responsible for answering their questions. When Yang Chendong entered Turpan city under the protection of 2,000 majestic Black Rider dragon guards, he saw that not only was the order in the city not chaotic, but there were even some commoners lining the streets to welcome him. Shock flashed through his heart. "Commander Su, don't tell me you spent money to invite all these people?" Looking at the people standing on both sides of the road, old and young, who were paying attention to him, Yang Chendong asked military commander Su He, who guided him into the city with a straight face. At that moment, Su He's face turned ugly. His gaze was a little evasive as he stammered, "Some of them came on their own accord, some were invited by your subordinates." Chapter 12:26. Well, at least you're honest. But don't do this kind of thing in the future. You've been with me for a long time, so you know I'm not a person who likes to pretend. I believe that if we really make these people live better and more peaceful than before, they will sincerely welcome us one day. Yang Chendong didn't blame Su He for this matter, but it was necessary to remind him. As the saying goes, subordinates follow the example of their superiors. Once he started the trend, the people below him would definitely follow suit. Not only would it be easy to corrupt the social atmosphere, but it would also be a huge waste of manpower and resources. Yes, seeing that Yang Chendong wasn't really angry, Su He felt relieved. After testing the bottom line, Su He wouldn't do this kind of trend in the future. Okay, let's talk about the situation in the city. To be honest, this battle was really risky. Try not to do this in the future. Although some things were reported in the telegram, it wasn't as clear as seeing it in person. Yang Chendong was also anxious to understand the current situation in the city. At least he wanted to know how much combat power the new army and Liaodong cavalry strengthening regiment had left, and whether they could continue to attack in a short period of time. Su He had already expected that Yang Chendong would ask, so he already knew the relevant data. This time, it was easy for him to speak. "Sixth young master, the situation is like this," Su He spoke while Yang Chendong listened carefully. When the army arrived in front of the palace, they just happened to talk about the Liaodong cavalry strengthening regiment's commander Tong Long fainted because of exhaustion. After hearing this, Yang Chendong didn't even rush to the palace. He let Su He lead the way and went straight to the nearby temporary military hospital. In the temporary military hospital, there were a lot of wounded people in this battle, and there were even a lot of wounded captives. And in the middle of it, there was an independent tent. In a temporary military hospital where there were not enough beds and tents, being able to enjoy the treatment of a single room was not something an ordinary person could do. Not to mention, the 5-star army had always been particular about equality between officers and soldiers. Very few people were able to enjoy single rooms. However, there was still one person who enjoyed such treatment under the special permission of Commander Su He. He was Tong Long, the commander of the Liaodong cavalry regiment. In this battle, the 5,000 men of the reinforced regiment had managed to attract and drive off 40,000 cavalry. It was also because of their sacrifice that they were able to achieve such a great victory in Turpan city. Not only did they capture countless prisoners, but they also gained a lot of money and rations. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the reinforced regiment had achieved the greatest merit this time. As the commander of the troops, Tong Long had killed countless people until he fell off his horse. It could be said that this battle had shown his might and prestige. It was not an exaggeration to say that his name could be described as having outstanding military achievements. After a day of rest, Tong Long had recovered a lot of strength. Not only could he eat by himself, but he could also get out of bed and walk. If it wasn't for the strong request of the military doctor, he probably would have returned to the army. When talking about the army, the two people lying on the bed and sitting on the side who came to take care of him were both silent. This battle was indeed a victory, and the Liaodong cavalry regiment had achieved a great merit because of it. However, the losses were also huge. Out of the 5,000 cavalry, only 500 survived. Among them, 200 were too heavily injured and would probably not be able to fight on horseback in the future. With such a huge loss, Tong Long and Zhao Xing in the single room didn't know how to face it. They didn't know what to say. Logically speaking, when the army had fought to this extent, even if they were to immediately disband, no one would say anything. If they couldn't even gather enough people to form a normal battalion, how could they talk about a reinforced regiment or an independent army? Vice Commander Zhao, do you think our reinforced regiment will be disbanded because of this? Lying on the bed and frowning, Tong Long had a glimmer of hope, but at the same time, he was also worried. When Zhao Xing, who came to take care of him, heard this, he first raised his head, then shook his head. Commander, don't think about these things. This time, no matter how you look at it, we did a great job, so we shouldn't be disbanded. Huh. Zhao Xing's answer clearly didn't dispel Tong Long's doubts. He smiled bitterly and said, "You already said it, so it shouldn't be. It seems like there's a high chance that we'll be disbanded. But that's also true. We're a surrendered army. When they agreed to let us form our own regiment, it was probably because they considered that we wouldn't be able to adapt. It was also to show others. Now, our soldiers are all gone, so we can openly disband. But this way, I'm afraid we'll have to be separated." To be honest, Vice Commander Zhao, the feeling of commanding an army with you is really great. I really like it. I'm also willing to work under you. Zhao Xing raised his head. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he closed his mouth. Regardless of whether it was him or Tong Long, they didn't have any foundation in the 5-star army. If they had to be connected, it would be that they were friends with Bai Shuang, the commander of the 4th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division. But distant water couldn't quench a present thirst. Furthermore, he was only a regiment commander. Although he was in the world's #1 cavalry division and his regiment was more valuable, he was still far away from them. Even if he was right in front of them, would he be willing to speak up for them? They didn't have any connections with the higher-ups. If this happened in Baiming, needless to say, their reinforced regiment would definitely be disbanded. Perhaps they would give them another position because of their contributions, but needless to say, it wouldn't be as important and independent as before. After all, a surrendered general was a surrendered general. Today, the 5-star army surrendered. Who knew if other people would surrender tomorrow? In the ward, there was a period of silence. After some time, Zhao Xing finally couldn't help but ask, "Commander, tell me the truth, do you regret it? This time, we've sacrificed our entire reinforced team just for this victory." I don't regret it." Before Zhao Xing could finish, Tong Long had already opened his mouth. "There are things a man can do, and there are things he can't do. Since you sincerely chose the 5-star army, of course, you have to perform well. But do you regret it?" Of course I don't regret it. If it wasn't for Bugnam of Gojoseon's favor, I might just be a normal soldier now, or I might have been sent to farm. Now that I can follow you and lead the army to victory, it's worth it. Good, no regrets, good, worth it." Just as Zhao Xing finished speaking and expressed his stance, the curtain of the ward was pulled open from the outside. Then, a tall and sturdy figure appeared in front of the two of them. Due to the lack of light, both Tong Long and Zhao Xing couldn't see who it was. However, when they gradually got used to it and saw who it was, their expressions changed drastically. Tong Long didn't care about anything else. He immediately jumped off the bed and shouted together with Zhao Xing, who was already kneeling on the ground. Your subordinate greets Bugnam of Gojoseon. Long live Bugnam of Gojoseon. Get up. When Yang Chendong saw Tong Long get off the bed and kneel on the ground, he quickly got up and helped him up. This scene made Tong Long extremely touched. After all, the person who helped him was the soul of the 5-star army. At the same time, he was Bugnam of Gojoseon, who was personally conferred the title by the great Ming Dynasty's emperor. Thank you Bugnam of Gojoseon. But how could your subordinate have made you personally come? Tong Long's voice was slightly choked as he spoke. Unlike others, he was someone who had once studied in the capital of Baiming. It was because of this that he was very familiar with status and rank. Thinking back to when he was in the capital of Baiming, any 3rd or 4th rank civil official wouldn't put him in their eyes. Even if he sent money to them, they wouldn't even be able to meet the person in question. But now, he was only slightly injured, and Bugnam of Gojoseon had actually made an appearance. "Ai, are your injuries okay?" Yang Chendong personally helped Tong Long back to the bed. This action made it difficult for him to stand or sit. But before he could say anything, Yang Chendong's laughter rang out. "How can you say that he's worthy? In this battle, you fought well with the new army. Especially your Liaodong cavalry regiment. You only had 5,000 men and horses, but you dared to fight and charge. You didn't show the slightest bit of fear in the face of an enemy several times your size. On the contrary, you killed them until their men and horses fell. Good, very good. Thank you Bugnam of Gojoseon." Hearing this praise, Tong Long and Zhao Xing hurriedly knelt to express their gratitude. "Alright, there's no need to keep kneeling. We don't do this here. Right, in the future, you can call me king, or you can call me the 6th young master. There's no need to call me Bugnam of Gojoseon. That would make us seem distant." Yang Chendong said with a chuckle. The people below had many different names for Yang Chendong. Those who were closest to him, such as Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, naturally called him the young master. Those who were closer, such as some of the senior officials, called Yang Chendong the 6th young master. Those who were further away were allowed to call him king. Only the most ordinary people called Yang Chendong the Bugnam of Gojoseon. In other words, from the way they addressed Yang Chendong, one could tell whether they were close or not. This time, Yang Chendong allowed the two to call him king. This was a sign of closeness. "Yes, king." Tong Long and Zhao Xing's faces flashed with joy, and they immediately changed the way they addressed him. That's right. Right, I heard that the two of you are injured. How are you? Are you in any trouble? Yang Chendong asked with a sincere expression of concern. "We're fine. We can now take our swords and mount our horses to kill the enemy." This time, the two of them spoke in unison. "Good, as expected of the Tiger General of the 5-star army. Since that's the case, the two of you listen to my orders." Yang Chendong saw that the two of them did not seem to be in any trouble. He was relieved and immediately shouted loudly. The two of them were stunned by Yang Chendong's shout. Out of instinct, the two of them straightened their bodies and replied in unison. "Your subordinates are here." Chapter 12:27. Yang Chendong's gaze swept across the two of them, before he said, "In view of the outstanding performance of the Liaodong Cavalry Regiment in the attack on Tulyafan City, they will be awarded a first-class merit. The soldiers who died will be compensated, and the soldiers who are still alive will be given jobs. The rest will be promoted by 3 ranks. Regiment Commander Tong Long and Deputy Regiment Commander Zhao Xing have performed valiantly, and will be promoted to Liaodong Cavalry Division. They will be allowed to lead 10,000 soldiers, and will be independent of the other armies. Once the order is given, they will be given priority to choose from the captives, and will rebuild the army's prestige." Yang Chendong's voice reverberated throughout the room, causing Tong Long and Zhao Xing's eyes to light up. When they heard that they could rebuild the army, and change from a regiment to a division, the two of them were excited. After the order was given, the two of them immediately knelt on the ground and said in unison, "Yes, Your Majesty." This time, all the soldiers will be given priority to be recruited from the captives of the battle. As for the regiment commander, I will make the arrangements for you. There is only one request, and that is to form the army as soon as possible. There will be a big battle ahead. Yang Chendong looked at the two of them, his eyes filled with hope as he spoke. "Yes, Your Majesty, don't worry. We will not let you down. Please watch our performance." At this time, both Tong Long and Zhao Xing were extremely excited. They had thought that they would lose their positions, and would be suppressed. However, they did not expect that in the face of military merits, Yang Chendong would treat everyone equally. This time, they were confident. In the future, when they encountered a tough battle, they would know how to perform better. This was also Yang Chendong's goal. As his power grew, his territory grew, and his army grew. He did not have enough people in his hands. This meant that he needed to rope in some of the people who were previously enemies, but were knowledgeable, to work for him. However, a surrendered general was still a surrendered general. No matter how sincere he was, it was inevitable that some people would have doubts. This time, he had used the opportunity of Tong Long and Zhao Xing's great victory to increase the rewards. He wanted to show everyone that as long as they had the ability, as long as they made great contributions, they would receive the same treatment as everyone else and be rewarded as well. As for Tong Long and Zhao Xing, after receiving the order to rebuild the Liaodong cavalry division, their injuries seemed to have mostly healed, and they immediately began to prepare. The two of them were originally talented, and what they lacked was an opportunity to display their talents. This time, not only Tong Long's Liaodong cavalry division, but Su He's new army also began to prepare their replacements. After the battle, they had lost almost an entire division, and needed to replenish their numbers. Yang Chendong had fully considered this problem, and immediately said that if there were not enough people among the captives, they could recruit soldiers from Turpan City. He had long heard reports from intelligence personnel that Turpan had dismissed some of the experienced soldiers to return home to farm. This was originally a manifestation of hiding soldiers among the people, and now it was convenient for Yang Chendong. If there were not enough soldiers, the first batch of 100,000 soldiers from Shaowei province would arrive. At that time, there would be suitable people to choose from among them. However, because of this, Yang Chendong had no choice but to stop attacking. Just Turpan City alone had 200,000 people, and it was truly worthy of being the capital of a country. It would also take time to move all these people out and replace them with people from other areas. Fortunately, when Su He told all of the people in the city that he would not change his promise of giving them land, and on the contrary, there would be more land in other places, the voices of the people became much quieter. It was not enough to just give carrots. Su He followed Yang Chendong's instructions and picked up a big stick with the other hand. The general idea was that if anyone didn't want to leave, once the war started, not only his property could not be guaranteed, but also his life could be lost at any time. As ordinary people, no one was willing to live in the chaos of war. With this big stick raised high in the air, the few remaining voices of opposition quickly disappeared. Now, they only needed to wait for the first batch of 100,000 soldiers from the Japanese Empire and 200,000 people from other regions to arrive. Then, they would be able to gain a firm foothold in Turpan City and start conquering the entire Ili province. In front of Turpan City. Every day, countless people of various races could be seen passing by. On both sides of them, there would always be many soldiers protecting them. On the city gate tower, Marquis Wuxia Xianxia's brows were tightly knitted together. His heart was like a stormy sea rolling over and over. Once upon a time, Xianxia had looked down on Yang Chendong. It was just that he had a good background and had become the favorite of the emperor because he had given a potato to the emperor. He had also looked down on him because he was a business genius who knew how to make money. But no matter what his identity was, in the eyes of a general like Shi Heng, he was just a weak young master who only knew how to talk. If he wanted to, he could trample such a person to death at any time. But suddenly, the Tumu fortress incident had put Yang Chendong at the heart of the struggle. Then, there was the Battle of the Capital, and Yang Chendong had completely shone, becoming known as the war god. From then on, when Shi Heng looked at Yang Chendong, there was not only jealousy and envy in his eyes, but also a trace of fear. Until now, Yang Chendong had become the Bugnam of Gojoseon. Although he had made progress, he was just a Marquis Wuxia. More importantly, he had already broken away from the shackles of the great Ming dynasty and become the king of a region. But now, he was just a commander-in-chief who had to Biming the emperor. The difference between the two was so great that although Shi Heng was unwilling, there was nothing he could do. After all, the gap was so big that he had no way to surpass him. When the Battle of Origin City began, Shi Heng thought that the opportunity had come, but he did not expect that he would fail at the last step. Now, he was forced to retreat to Tulu City and watch Yang Chendong soar to the 9th heaven. The gap was getting bigger and bigger, and Shi Heng's resentment in his heart was getting deeper and deeper. Now, he just wanted to have a chance to defeat the 5-star army and prove that he was the best general in the great Ming dynasty. This pride made him like a ball of fire, which had been tormenting him for a period of time. If it were not for the shortage of food and fodder and the fact that the reinforcements had not yet arrived, he was afraid that he would have sent the troops after Yang Chendong left Tulu City. This wait lasted for more than 2 months. Finally, news came from the imperial court that the new rations had been delivered and the new soldiers were being assembled. Just as everything was about to be ready, he saw the Northern Ming Army's Great Migration Project, or rather, the Great Movement. Every day, he did not know how many people and soldiers walked through the gate of Tulu City. 1 day, 2 days. It had been like this every day for more than half a month, and there was still no sign of it stopping. Shi Heng's fire was also constantly cooling down. Until now, cold sweat had begun to appear on his forehead. How many days has it been? Shi Heng, who was standing on the city tower, asked with a trembling voice. Marquis, it's the 22nd day, General Zhou Qing, who was at the side, answered the question with a serious face. 22 days, 22 days. Shi Heng's face turned uglier as he muttered the number silently. If there were only 10,000 people passing by each day, that would be more than 200,000. Not to mention, it was far from ending. He really didn't know where Yang Chendong had gotten so many civilians and soldiers, and what exactly were they preparing to do. The moment the 5-star army bared their fangs, Shi Heng suddenly had an idea of invincibility. He did not even dare to think about it. If the target of these soldiers and civilians was Tulu City, would he still be able to defend it? Or rather, how long would he be able to defend it? Just as Shi Heng's face was filled with thoughts, another group of cavalry and infantry walked through Tulu City with a bright 5-star flag. They seemed to be intentionally demonstrating their power. Coincidentally, Shi Heng caught sight of them as they passed by the city walls. Is that ancient river? When Shi Heng looked up, he saw a handsome general in armor walking less than a mile away from the city. Seeing that figure, Shi Heng's squinted eyes suddenly widened. Yes. I think so. Zhou Qing recognized the person at a glance. It was General Ancient River, a former member of the 10,000 prefectures. As a former colleague, he couldn't be more familiar with him. But when he noticed Shi Heng's tone, he quickly changed his words and spoke in an uncertain manner. He doesn't look like he is Ancient River. Didn't he already surrender to the 5-star army? What is he doing here? When Shi Heng saw that Gu He, who was riding a warhorse, was approaching the city gate tower, he involuntarily took half a step back even though he was standing on the city gate tower. He spoke with an anxious expression in his eyes. The person below the city was indeed Ancient River. But he was no longer Biming's 10,000 prefectures general, but he was now the commander of the 5-star Army's new 1st Cavalry Division. The order was issued half a month ago by Yang Chendong himself. The new 5 armies were established. After the new 1st Army, the new 2nd Army, and the new Army, the new 5 armies were established. Moreover, it was the former commander of Baiming's 10,000 prefectures general, Shi Wanshan. When this news came out, many people's jaws dropped. It was also because of Shi Wanshan's sudden promotion that it attracted a lot of speculation. On the contrary, no one cared about why the new 4th Army didn't exist. They didn't know the plot in Yang Chendong's heart. He wouldn't allow anyone to steal the name of the new 4th Army, not even himself. The 5-star Army's expansion and the establishment of a new army were no longer a secret. For the new commander position, many people were secretly moving around. Some of them wanted to command more troops and earn more merits. Some of them were selfish and wanted to be in a high position with more power. They could always do more things that benefited themselves. Chapter 12:28. For this reason, Yu Mian, the vice-commander of the army headquarters, Leng Song, and even the vice-commander of the navy headquarters, Gao Xiong, had interceded through various channels. However, no one would have thought that this position would fall on the head of Shi Wanshan, who had just surrendered and had not made any contributions. When the new army commander, Tiger's Mane, represented Yang Chendong and announced this order in front of the officers of Shi City, even Shi Wanshan himself was stunned. Although he had been in charge of an army of more than 100,000 people when he was in Baiming, he could be considered to have the experience and qualifications to control an army. However, this was the 5-star Army. As a general who had just surrendered, it was better not to talk about his qualifications. Actually, it wasn't that Shi Wanshan hadn't heard about the establishment of the new 5 armies, but whether it was himself, his old subordinates Gu He and Ning Wenfeng, none of them thought about it. In their eyes, this was something that had nothing to do with them. With their current status, they would be thankful if they could be elected as one of the division commanders. It was not impossible for them to be appointed as a regiment commander. All of this was the analysis of Ning Wenfeng, who was known as the smartest of the 3. In his words, before surrendering, Shi Wanshan had said that he did not want to fight with Baiming. After all, he had come from there. Yang Chendong had also agreed to this matter in the telegram. Now that the new 5 armies were going to fight in Ili, it was very likely that they would be incorporated into it. If this was the case, whether it was as a division commander or a regiment commander, they would still have military power in their hands and could fully show their talent. They were afraid that they would be assigned a deputy position. If that was the case, there would be a main position above them, and it would be difficult to realize even if they had ideas. That would be the most uncomfortable thing. It was precisely because the hope was very low, or even that there was no hope. When the pie fell from the sky, Shi Wanshan's eyes were dazzled and his face was full of disbelief. As for Shi Wanshan's reaction, Tiger's Mane could empathize with him, but he didn't expect it either. However, since this was an order from the young master, he would definitely carry it out unconditionally. Therefore, he only glanced at the petrified Shi Wanshan and continued to read out the order. Order: Ancient River is the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 5 armies, Li Yu is the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, and Meng Chao is the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division. Each division has 4 regiments, each regiment has 2,000 soldiers, and each regiment has 400 soldiers. Each regiment has 8,400 soldiers. At this point, Ancient River and the other 2 were also excited. They never thought that they would actually become a division commander. That meant that they could command close to 10,000 cavalrymen. However, no one noticed that one of the officers was clenching his fists, revealing the nervousness and unwillingness in his heart. This person was none other than Ning Wenfeng, the former head of Baiming's Wanquan Du Si. In the Wanquan Du Si, Shi Wanshan was in charge of the overall situation. His breadth of mind also allowed him to have talent in this area. In terms of martial prowess, Ancient River was naturally the most outstanding. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was a fierce general. However, when it came to the smartest person, the one who could understand the intentions of the higher-ups the most was definitely Ning Wenfeng. Most of the time, this Ning Wenfeng acted as Shi Wanshan's military advisor. This time's appointment was already beyond his expectations. Shi Wanshan was actually the commander of an army, and Ancient River was the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. However, he wasn't included in the order. Could it be that Bugnam of Gojoseon wanted to separate the three of them and not let them work together? But if that was the case, why did he give out the positions of commander and commander? He couldn't figure it out, Ning Wenfeng shook his head and his face was a little pale. He was thinking that as the positions changed in the future, he was afraid that the gap between him and Shi Wanshan and Ancient River would become bigger and bigger. After a long time, the relationship between the brothers would not be the same as before. Just as Ning Wenfeng lowered his head and thought about this, Lieutenant General Tiger's man, who was standing on the stage, announced that after the Battle of the First City, Yang Chendong was promoted to Lieutenant General. Not only that, but Leng Song and Gao Xiong were also promoted from Major General to Lieutenant General. Leng Feng's Army and Navy Division commanders were also promoted from Senior Colonel to Major General. The only difference was that the commander of the new 2nd Army, the commander of the new army, Su He, and the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Tian Hu, were still Major General. Yang Chendong wanted to use this method to tell the world that the Tiger's man of the new army was different from ordinary commanders. He was the leader of all commanders. He opened his mouth and said, Ning Wenfeng is the commander of the infantry division of the new 5th Army, 4th Division, with a total of 15,000 soldiers. Wow! There was an uproar. A commander could command 15,000 soldiers. Except for the earliest Mo Bay Division, it seemed that not many people could enjoy this kind of treatment. But now, Ning Wenfeng had such achievements without doing anything. What kind of person was he? For a time, many people's eyes searched the crowd. At this time, Ning Wenfeng did not hear this at all. He was still entangled in Yang Chendong's purpose. He believed that his ability was not worse than anyone. It was just that his previous superior was Shi Wanshan, his own big brother, so he was embarrassed to take the credit. Since it was to measure talent, why didn't Bugnam of Gojoseon see his talent? Was it because he was too low-key? Ning Wenfeng, who was still thinking, did not know that Tiger's man had just announced his new appointment. He also did not know how many people were envious of him at this time. It was not until a burning gaze fell on him that he woke up from a dream. Then, Ancient River, who was beside him, gently nudged him. Hurry up and thank him with us. Before he could figure out what was going on, Ning Wenfeng was gently pulled out of the group by Ancient River. Then, they all gave a military salute that was not very standard. Ning Wenfeng, who had already walked out of the group, was still a little confused. He still did not understand why he stood out. Until Tiger's man on the stage said again, everyone is a talent personally appointed by Bugnam of Gojoseon. I hope you will not let down this expectation. Also, considering that the new 5 armies have just arrived and have not made any achievements, our ranks are lower. Among them, Commander Shi Wanshan will be a senior colonel, and the other 4 division commanders will be colonels. I hope that the next time we meet, you will be promoted to Major General and Senior Colonel like the other armies. After saying this, Hu Mang looked expectantly at the 5 people who had stepped forward. In fact, how could he not want to contribute his troops and give it his all? How could he not want to fight on the battlefield and establish meritorious service? But who asked him to be Yang Chendong's most trusted person? He wanted to stay in the first city and build it like an iron bucket. Okay, you can go and prepare. The soldiers can be selected from the Han army, the Mongol tribe, and the small Japanese army that has just arrived. The preparation time is half a month, and then we will send them to the inner area. After saying this, Tiger's man waved his hand. Immediately, the dust settled on the high-ranking officials of the new 5 armies. This decision was completely out of everyone's expectations. The sudden appearance did indeed catch some people off guard. However, this order was personally issued by Yang Chendong. It was said that he only reported it to the army headquarters before announcing it. Even Leng Song, the deputy commander, did not have any chance to intervene. This was enough to prove Yang Chendong's expectations for the new 5 armies. When the meeting was over, Tiger's man left first. The other officers took the opportunity to congratulate Shi Wanshan and the others. No matter what, it was not a bad thing to be on good terms with a commander. Ning Wenfeng, who was in the crowd, was still confused. Facing the congratulations of several officers who he did not even know the names of, he only smiled and cupped his hands. When the people around him gradually decreased, Ancient River gently pulled him, then said with a smile, "What's wrong, Commander Ning? Are you not happy to be in command of 15,000 infantrymen? Why don't we change it?" "What? Command 15,000 infantrymen? What's going on?" Ning Wenfeng was completely confused. His face was full of doubts and puzzlement. He didn't know that Ning Wenfeng had been distracted. He only thought that Ning Wenfeng was sick and wasn't feeling well. He reached out and touched Ning Wenfeng's forehead. Feeling that it wasn't hot, he said, "What's wrong? Didn't you hear when Commander Tiger announced the order just now? You are now the infantry division commander of the new 5 armies, 4th Division." "What? My division commander?" Ning Wenfeng exclaimed and pointed at himself. This scene was also seen by the other officers who were walking at the back, but they all smiled and shook their heads. They did not care. Obviously, if they were suddenly appointed as division commanders, their situation would not be much better. Seeing Ning Wenfeng making a fuss about nothing, Ancient River nodded. "Yes, it was just announced in front of everyone. How can it be fake? I say, what are you thinking? Didn't you hear it just now?" Faced with He's question, Ning Wenfeng already didn't care at all. When he found out that he also held the position of a division commander, moreover, he was the infantry division commander of 15,000 men, at this moment, he only felt deep self-blame. What did he mean by Yang Chendong did not have the insight and could not see through people? In the end, he measured the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. After a while, Ning Wenfeng finally reacted. Then, he looked around and did not see Shi Wanshan's figure. He could not help but ask, "Where's Big Brother?" "Oh, Big Brother went to see the other 2 division commanders." You also know that a person who becomes a division commander will naturally be busier. Ancient River said with a matter-of-fact expression. This order shattered a lot of hope, but at the same time, it also gave a lot of people hope. In the past, it was always said that the 5-star army did not care about seniority and only looked at ability. Some people believed these words, but some people did not. However, with the matter of the new 5 armies, they had no choice but to believe it. Not long after, a new order was spread throughout the army. Commander Tong Long, who was also a fallen general of Liaodong, was promoted to division commander after making a great contribution. With the 2 things that happened before and after, at this moment, no one doubted the fairness of the ability. Chapter 1229. And now, Ancient River appeared alone in front of Tulu city to demonstrate his power. Previously, he had suffered a lot of grievances in the Baiming army, especially under Shi Heng's command. Now that he was a dragon in the sky, of course, he had to get rid of this mess and let the Baiming army know that he, Ancient River, was a talent that even Bugnam of Gojoseon had his eyes on. Of course, due to the distance, Ancient River did not know that Shi Heng was on the city tower at this time. Otherwise, he would have walked up and shouted a few words even if he was in danger of being shot by arrows. Therefore, he just wore a divisional-level white cloak and walked in a big circle in front of the city. Then, he quickly rode his horse and rushed straight to his 1st Cavalry Division. White cloak. Divisional General? How long has it been since Ancient River left? He has already been entrusted with an important position. On the city tower, some young generals who had long understood the officer ranks of the 5-star army sighed. Among these sighs, there was a lot of jealousy, hatred, and of course, envy. Among them, there were many knowledgeable people who thought in their hearts, if they also went to the 5-star army, what would it be like now? Didn't they see that Ancient River, who could not survive in Baiming, was now a divisional general? Of course, these envious people definitely did not include Shi Heng. After he recognized Ancient River, he snorted coldly and then asked General Zhou Qing, who was standing beside him, "Have you found out how many troops there are in the first city now?" "I don't have the detailed number, but I have the approximate number." When Zhou Qing answered this sentence, there was an obvious pause. When one looked carefully, there was a trace of panic on his face. Shi Heng, who was filled with hatred in his heart, did not pay attention to this. He only wanted to know the situation of the 5-star army in the first city. In his opinion, although they did not succeed in besieging the first city a while ago, they still severely injured their opponents. Now, their strength should be weaker. Well, about how many people are there? About. Zhou Qing was a little hesitant and did not answer immediately. What? Is it difficult to answer? Shi Heng finally noticed the change in Zhou Qing. This shout also attracted the attention of some people nearby. "Tell me, how many troops do you have? I want to know." Shi Heng didn't care so much. He had long been used to everyone's attention. At this moment, there was a smile on his face. He wanted to take this opportunity to let everyone know about the situation in the beginning city. This way, he could increase his confidence. Zhou Qing also noticed the gazes of the people around him. At this moment, he didn't want to say anything. However, he did not expect Shi Heng to be angry. There was a hint of anger in Shi Heng's eyes. Hence, he decided not to think too much about it. After all, Zhou Qing was the one who forced him to say it. After that, Zhou Qing replied straightforwardly, reporting to Marquis. "According to our scouts' investigation, there are about 700,000 people from the 5-star army in Origin City." A mere 7, what? How many did you say? At this moment, Shi Heng finally came to his senses. He stared at Zhou Qing with his eyes wide open. 700,000 people, but not all of them are troops. There are also some civilians. Zhou Qing knew that this would be the result, but what could he do? "You forced me to say it." Hearing that there were quite a number of civilians, Shi Heng suppressed the fear and anger in his heart and asked again, "How many troops do I mean? You don't have to use the number of civilians to deceive me." "Yes, there are about 300,000 soldiers." This time, Zhou Qing finally gave a definite answer. 300,000, this number made Shi Heng's body tremble. He then forced himself to stand firm. There was a trace of blood in his eyes at this moment. He was speechless for a long time. He originally thought that after more than a year of siege in the beginning city, the strength there would be greatly reduced. Once Baiming's reinforcements and provisions appeared, it would be time for him to launch a large-scale counterattack. He never expected that the number of the enemy's troops would increase instead of decreasing. How did this trick work? How could he bear this result? Then, whether it was Zhou Qing or Shi Heng, what was even more unexpected was that this number would continue to expand as time passed. It was not because of anything else, but because Shaowei province had a population of 8 million. Among them, more than 600,000 soldiers were captured by the 5-star army. Under the encouragement of the 5-star army policy, more young people from Shaowei province volunteered to join the army. According to Yang Chendong's plan, Shaowei province could recruit at least 400,000 soldiers. In total, there would be 1 million soldiers. At least half of them would be transferred to the grassland. One could imagine how huge this number was. In comparison, the 700,000 soldiers now were just the beginning. When Yang Chendong left Shaowei province, he had already made his next goal clear. That was to unify the grassland and then expand to the west and northeast respectively. For example, taking down Ili was just a part of the plan to go west. These were only the plans of the army. The navy would also go out of the South China Sea and attack the Indian Ocean. Then, they would attack Africa, the North and South continents, and North America. He wanted to take advantage of the fact that there was no obvious world structure to conquer the world. If he wanted to accomplish this feat, he naturally needed enough soldiers. Not only Shaowei province, but all the countries under Yang Xie's control began to mobilize. More and more young people from other races joined the ranks of the 5-star army. In the future, the number of soldiers in the 5-star army would only increase. Shi Heng naturally did not know about all of this. Even if he was beaten to death, he would not have thought of all of this. This was the result of limited vision. In the eyes of people like him, the great Ming dynasty was already the sky. Whoever could unify the north and south of the great Ming dynasty would be a hero. As for the world, the great Ming dynasty and its surrounding countries should be the world. Shi Heng walked down the city tower silently. At this moment, he felt a chill in his heart. At the same time, he decided to immediately report the situation to the acting emperor. Previously, he had boasted that as long as the provisions were in place and 200,000 new recruits were given, he would be able to take down the first city and regain control of the grassland. Now, it seemed that this was far from enough. At this moment, the logistics division in the first city was extremely busy. It was already time for the autumn harvest. The harvest of the provinces under Yang Xie's control this year was very good, especially after the centralized management of the grain fields. After the centralized planting, not only did it save more effort and people, but the amount of grain harvested was also 20% more than in previous years. This 20% should not be underestimated. It would increase the food for millions of people. This also indirectly made the army's work of collecting grain more smooth. Carriages and loads of provisions were piled up in the granary that had been prepared long ago in the first city. More new foreign troops from all over the world had also gathered here. As the head of the logistics division, the number of soldiers that Yang Xi needed to be allocated to him had reached a terrifying 300,000. Just this alone had made many officers envious. Even the commander of the new army, Tiger's Mane, had come to Yang Xi more than a few times. The general idea was to ask him to leave enough soldiers for himself. Of course, the quality must be guaranteed. That's right, the new army was going to be rebuilt into a new army group. The position of the group commander was naturally Tiger's Mane. According to the plan given by Yang Chendong, the 3 armies under his command were the 101st, 102nd, and 103rd armies, as well as a direct division of the army group. Each army group would be divided into 4 divisions, and each division had 4 regiments. A division would have 8,400 people, and an army group would have 33,600 people. In addition to the 3 armies, a direct division would have 10,000 people. In this way, the new army group would have 118,000 combat troops. If the logistics, medical personnel, and headquarters personnel were included, the total number would be more than 120,000. From one army group to an army group, there were many areas that needed to be reformed, and the number of officers that needed to be used was even more. It was not something that could be completed overnight. This time, Tiger's Mane had informed Yang Xi in advance so that he could leave behind more troops that were good at fighting. Even Tiger's Mane had made a move, let alone others. For a time, Yang Xi, who was only a division commander, became a hot steamed bun in everyone's eyes. Countless people came to ask for advice. However, with the example of Yang Lu, Yang Si was able to stay true to his heart. He knew how to balance the four sides and supplement the strengths of the troops to complement each other. For example, in the past few days, after receiving the telegram from the sixth young master, Yang Si immediately made arrangements. He immediately arranged for the first army, second army, and the new 5 armies, a total of 3 armies of more than 100,000 people to move from the first city to the Yilili district. Under Yang Chendong's orders and Yang Si's leadership, the original 1st Reserve Division was disbanded, and its division commander was allowed to be the commander of the 1st Army of the Outsiders. Under his command were the 301, 302, 303, and 304 divisions. The original 1st to 5th divisions were disbanded, and the original 1st Division commander Nyo Duo was promoted to the commander of the 2nd Army. Under his command were the 305th, 306, 307th, and 308th divisions. Among them, the 1st Army of the Outsiders was the first to leave the first city, and the vanguard had already arrived at 8 Miles City. Then, it was the 2nd Army of the Outsiders, followed by the new 5 armies, Ancient River, and the others that Shiheng had just seen. It could be seen that this time, Yang Chendong was determined to solve the problem in one battle. He would not allow some places to be reversed. This time, he would use the situation of the army to completely occupy and control that area. After sending out 3 armies, Yang Si still had to help form a new army. In addition, he had to start forming the 3rd Army, the 4th Army, and even more armies. It had to be said that the pressure was still very great. However, Yang Si, who had great power in his hands, was both painful and happy. The Turpan kingdom was occupied, and the allied forces of the 3 countries were defeated. When the news spread to the entire Yili district, the crowd was in an uproar. Many people were shouting in their hearts that the wolf was coming, but for a moment, they were somewhat helpless. In particular, the 3 kings of this area felt even more pressure. In addition to arranging their troops tightly and recruiting soldiers, they also sent people to Turpan City, wanting to solve the problem in this area by asking for peace. Chapter 1230. The only difference between the 3 kings was the leader of Wara, Yeshen. It could be said that he was the one who first came into contact with Yang Chendong. At that time, Yang Chendong was only the 6th brother of the Yang family and had not shown any military talent. In less than 10 years, Yang Chendong already had a territory that was countless times larger than his own. This made him feel ashamed, and at the same time, he knew that such an opponent would not back down, let alone talk about peace. Not putting his hopes on peace talks, Yeshen also did not contact the kings of the 3 kingdoms. In his view, since the 5-star army came and they could not talk about peace, then the 3 kingdoms could not back down and could only fight with the 5-star army. Whether or not he allied with them would not change this fact. Since that was the case, why would he need to ally with them? If he had the time, it would be better to look further and find a stronger ally to resist the 5-star army. The allies that Yeshen targeted were the descendants of the Mongol White Horde, Jiani Bek Khan and his brother Kelii. In 1428 AD, the White Horde was divided, and a bull seized the opportunity to seize the ruling power of the White Horde. He and his brother Kelii rebelled against a bull's rule. After they were defeated, they led their troops to seek refuge in the eastern Chagatai Khanate. They were not welcomed by the Khanate and were arranged to be nomads between the Chu and Taraz rivers. Kelii and his men supported Jiani Bek Khan and established the Kazakh Khanate. At this time, the 2 of them had just become Khans. The entire Kazakh Khanate was still in a period of instability, and there were still some opposing forces that appeared from time to time. In order to gain the trust of the 2 brothers, Yeshen sent one of his most trusted and one of the 4 remaining generals, Bo-Mur, to lead 50,000 elite Walla cavalry into the Kazakh Khanate and eliminate the opposing forces one by one. In more than a month, who knew how many people they had killed, gradually stabilizing Jiani Bek Khan's position and gaining the friendship of his brother Kelii. Seeing that it was about time, Beaumure brought up the matter of the 5-star army. He even mentioned that if the lips were gone, the teeth would feel cold. Just like the rise of the Mongol Empire in the past, the 5-star army will also slaughter their way over like our ancestors. At that time, we will all become prey and be at their mercy. This was what Beaumure had told Janabek Khan and his brother Kalei. After that, some information regarding the 5-star army was sent to the two of them. The strength and rise of the 5-star army quickly aroused the vigilance of the two brothers. It was not easy for them to obtain their current territory. Of course, they would not allow others to seize it. In order to stabilize their forces, they quickly decided to send out their troops. I personally led 80,000 cavalrymen and followed Beaumure into the Ili region, directly converging with Yeshin's troops. Yang Chendong did not know about any of this. Yang Shi's intelligence network was indeed very powerful, but he didn't pay much attention to Kazakh, which was still very far away. In his eyes, attacking and occupying Kazakh wasn't the most important thing at the moment, so he just established a small intelligence group there. In addition, that region had always been in chaos, so the intelligence network could not be of any use. This allowed the 5-star army to have an additional 220,000 cavalrymen under their noses. Moreover, they were all elite cavalrymen that no one had discovered. Just like how Yang Chendong was mobilizing his troops, the enemy was also mobilizing their troops. Everyone was not idle and was racing against time to prepare. It was as if a storm was brewing. How could Yang Chendong, who was in the Turpan Palace, not know that the enemy was also preparing for war? In particular, the emissaries from the 3 countries had just been chased away by him. As for the idea of compensation from the 3 countries, he gave the most direct rejection. In his eyes, if they surrendered now, the army could live, the people could live, and even the king could live. He would give them all the best arrangements. However, it was impossible for him to withdraw his troops. The emissaries from the 3 countries left with regrets. Yang Chendong knew that there was no other way but to fight. It was only a fight. Who was he afraid of? Yang Chendong had absolute confidence in the 5-star army. Once the reinforcements arrived, he would have enough troops. That would be the time for him to launch an all-out attack. And just as Yang Chendong was thinking about the next military plan and which country to attack first, an urgent report suddenly appeared. The world's first cavalry division stationed at the Ala mountain pass sent an urgent message, and Ili suddenly sent 80,000 troops to surround them in this area. The 1st Cavalry Division could be said to be the most powerful army under Yang Chendong's command. In terms of cold weapons alone, even Leng Feng was no match for them. If even they sent an urgent message, one could imagine how bad the situation was. Young Master, according to Commander Tianhu, they are not in any danger now, but there is no direction to break out of the encirclement. Once time passes, food will become the biggest problem. Please make a decision as soon as possible. Beta Persei, who was acting as an advisor, came to this conclusion after reading the telegram and the sand table placed in front of him. Yang Chendong supported this point of view. With the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division, it was very difficult for anyone to find trouble with them. Now that they were not breaking out of the encirclement, they were just looking for and waiting for an opportunity. Of course, it was not that the 1st Cavalry Division was not unprepared for this trip. On the contrary, they were fully prepared. Otherwise, they would not have appeared alone at the Ala mountain pass. If only 80,000 people wanted to find trouble with them, it would be difficult. However, if the enemy increased the number of troops, the situation would become serious. According to Tianhu, looking for an opportunity to find the weakness of the Ili cavalry division that was surrounding them. Waiting was to see if Yang Chendong had a better battle plan, such as cooperating with the enemy from the inside and outside. If the 5-star army could send a large number of cavalry to support the 1st Cavalry Division, it would not be difficult to severely damage the 80,000 Ili cavalry division. In that case, it would be another great victory. Surrounding them but not attacking? What are they trying to do? Although Yang Chendong agreed with Beta Persei's analysis, there were still some questions in his heart that he could not explain clearly. For example, did the Ili cavalry division not know that it would be easy to be attacked from both inside and outside if they only surrounded them without attacking? If they knew and still did this, then what were they relying on? Young master, could it be that they know the power of the 1st Cavalry Division and don't want to take the initiative to attack? They want to wait for us to break out of the encirclement? After all, we are not as familiar with the local terrain as they are. Beta Persei heard Yang Chendong's doubts and expressed his thoughts again. Yang Chendong nodded after listening. We can't rule out this possibility, but we also have to guard against them having any backup plans, such as surrounding them to attack the reinforcements. Beta Persei was startled when he heard this, then said, Young master, are you saying that they are using the 1st Cavalry Division as bait to lure us over and then block our reinforcements? Aren't they a little too bold? Is it? On the battlefield, it's either you die or I live. It's okay to be bold, sometimes you can only achieve great things by daring to think. Yang Chendong laughed, then shook his head indifferently and said, it doesn't matter if they are plotting something or not, since they have surrounded the 1st Cavalry Division, then we have to save them. In this case, get the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division's division commander, Dai Qua. The 1st Cavalry Division was surrounded near the Ala mountain pass, which was indeed Ili Cavalry Division's doing. The reason why they did this was just as Yang Chendong thought. They wanted to attract more 5-star army to appear here and then defeat them one by one. Since there was no possibility for the two sides to solve the problem through peace talks, then the only thing left was to fight. Therefore, Ili Cavalry Division was prepared to make the first move. After contacting Yarkand and Turpan, they sent 80,000 cavalrymen to block the 1st Cavalry Division at the Ala mountain pass. With 80,000 cavalrymen against the 16,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division, it was exactly 5 times their strength. This was the reason why Ili Cavalry Division dared to do this. They had even more confidence because of the support of the Yarkiang Kingdom, the Turpan Kingdom, and the Vala tribe. Yes, after Yeshen received the support of 80,000 cavalrymen from the Kazakh Khanate, his military strength reached 220,000. This gave him the confidence to compete with Yang Chendong again. Not to mention, this time, they were in the dark, while the 5-star army was in the light, and with the full support of Ili Cavalry Division, he really couldn't think of any possibility of failure. The defeat of the allied army under the Turpan Kingdom taught the 3 kings a good lesson. After the incident, although they had criticized each other, the moment they sat down, the grim situation forced them to unite and fight against the 5-star army. After experiencing the trauma of the war, the foundation of the alliance became firmer. After seeing the power of the 5-star army, the 3 kingdoms started to recruit more soldiers. This wasn't just about the gains and losses of a city or a land. It involved the destruction of a country, so they couldn't help but muster up all their energy. Under the recruitment, the military strength of the 3 kingdoms was constantly increasing. Among them, Ili Cavalry Division recruited 100,000 soldiers, increasing their military strength to 270,000. Yarkand recruited 100,000 soldiers, increasing their military strength to 220,000. Turpan was even more impressive. They had always been hiding their soldiers among the people. This time, they recruited 150,000 soldiers, increasing their military strength to 250,000. If the 140,000 from Wara and the 80,000 from Kazakh were added, they would have another 220,000 soldiers. In total, they had nearly 1,000,000 soldiers, and most of them were cavalrymen who were good at fighting. If it wasn't for this recruitment, the 5 powers wouldn't have known that they had such great power. When this number was placed in front of them, it gave them endless confidence. Otherwise, they wouldn't have dared to attack the strongest of the 5-star army, the 1st Cavalry Division. Chapter 1231. In the words of Prime Minister Apu of Ili, if they were to move, they would send out the strongest troops of the 5-star army. As long as the 1st Cavalry Division was destroyed, the morale of the 5-star army would be affected, and it would be time for them to counterattack. With such a consensus, Ili sent out 80,000 troops to surround the Ayla mountain pass. This was because the other factions were slow in deploying their troops. Otherwise, it wouldn't be 80,000 troops, but 180,000 or 280,000. Surrounding the 1st Cavalry Division was only the first step of Apu's plan. While he urged the other factions to send more troops, he was also waiting for the 5-star army's response. If they wanted to break out of the encirclement, he would use his advantage in numbers to deal a heavy blow to them. On the other hand, if they decided to defend and wait for reinforcements to arrive, he would be able to use this time to dispatch more troops here and kill off the reinforcements one by one. Now that Apu had made the first move, it was time to see how the 5-star army would react. He wanted to see how the famous King Wunan of Damyang would break out of this situation. Apu didn't have to wait for too long before the 5-star army's reinforcements appeared. It was the Liaodong Army's 1st Cavalry Division. A total of 8,400 people rode out of the city. This scene was quickly noticed by the scouts and was reported to Apu and the other factions. They really are preparing for a middle attack. But this Bugnom of Gojoseon is looking down on someone too much. He only sent out 10,000 cavalry, does he really think he can turn the situation around? Men, inform King Harden Barter and ask him to make a move. After receiving the report, Apu revealed a look of understanding. In his view, Yang Chendong's move wasn't very smart. Just as a huge battle was brewing in Ili and could erupt at any time, a group of unexpected guests came to Jianghu city. The reason why it was called a group was because they didn't have many people, only 6 in total. Moreover, they were all very young. None of them were over 30 years old. Some of their faces were still brimming with youthfulness. Although they were young and few in number, no one could look down on them because they were all from Crimson City. They also had an identity that countless officials and military officers feared: disciplinary investigators. The Discipline Department was a new department established by the Crimson City City Lord, Yu Qian, after consulting with Yang Chendong. The scope of its management was very similar to the Commission for Discipline and Discipline in the modern era. At the same time, it also had the power of the Military Law Department. Its full name was the Disciplinary Investigation Department. Their duty was to investigate whether any official had colluded with the enemy, betrayed the country, or violated discipline. They were different from the Ministry of Supervision and the Ministry of Anti-Corruption. The corruption and abuse of power of the officials were not within their scope of investigation. What they valued was the integrity and loyalty of the officials. It could be said that this was a department to consolidate Yang Chendong's absolute dominance. This department had just been established not too long ago. In fact, they weren't even fully staffed yet. However, they had already appeared in Jianghu city. From this, it could be seen that they were going to do a big case for everyone to see. At the same time, they were also taking the opportunity to raise the prestige of their disciplinary investigation department. Unfortunately, the new Second Army became the first target of their investigation. When he received the notice from the Crimson City Lord, the commander of the new Second Army let out a long sigh. He knew that the matter of him faking his surrender was not over. Now, what should have come had finally come. When he received the news that the Disciplinary Investigation Department was coming to Jianghu City, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Kong Ji, came to the headquarters of the new Second Army with a face full of anger. The moment he saw Jianghu, he said with a look of indignation, "General, what is this Disciplinary Investigation Department doing? Even the Bugnom of Gojoseon didn't pursue our problem. What do they want to investigate? A straight foot is not afraid of a crooked shadow. If they want to investigate, then let them. We didn't do anything wrong. What are we afraid of?" Although Xiaojing was also a little angry, considering that Su Yuan was recommended by him and that he really did betray him, just based on this point, even if it was a big mistake that couldn't be remedied, it could only be investigated by others. Xiaojing's attitude didn't satisfy Kong Ji. He didn't come just to complain, but also to come up with an idea. "General, why don't we send a telegram to the king and tell him about this situation?" "No. The sixth young master is now fighting with Ili in the front. We can't be distracted." Xiaojing hurriedly waved his hand. He didn't want to trouble Yang Chendong because of his own matter. Although he was a little conflicted this time, why wouldn't he want to clear his name through this kind of investigation? Seeing that Xiaojing didn't agree, Kong Ji said indignantly, "But the king knows about our situation. He also said that we were wronged. We are people who have done meritorious deeds." "Okay, Mr. Kong, did you really do something wrong to the king and the 5-star army?" Xiaojing asked angrily when he saw that Kong Ji was still pestering him. "Of course not." Kong Ji patted his chest, looking like he didn't have to be afraid of ghosts screaming at his door if he didn't do anything wrong. "Since you didn't do anything wrong, why should we be afraid of investigating? Just let them do what they want. We should still do what we should do." Xiaojing waved his hand as he said this, but then his tone softened a lot. "Actually, this might not be a bad thing. After the investigation, there won't be any problems. Our new second army can be considered to have turned over a new leaf, and other people won't be able to pester us about this problem anymore." Kong Ji, who originally wanted to continue refuting, heard this last sentence, his eyes couldn't help but light up. "That's right. Anyway, we have never betrayed the king or the 5-star army. If they want to investigate, let them investigate. After this investigation, they must give us a conclusion." Seeing that Kong Ji had finally thought it through, Xiaojing also let out a sigh of relief. What he was most worried about was that the officers under him would be conflicted, which would affect their work. One had to know that the provisions, soldiers, and civilians that were heading to the Ili area had to pass through Xiaojing City. Xiaojing City had to receive a lot of people every day, so it was absolutely impossible to go on a business trip. "Don't worry. Castellan Yuqian has already given us an accurate answer. After this investigation, there will be a conclusion. With this conclusion, no one will talk about the new second army's past." Xiaojing calmed Kong Ji's anger, but he didn't know that some people were angry because of this. At this moment, in front of Xiaojing City, 6 young people were standing there. Their faces were very ugly. The leader was wearing a long robe. At this moment, he was frowning and covering his nose. From time to time, there would be civilians and soldiers entering the city. When they walked past him, they would bring different smells, which seemed to make him very annoyed. Speaking of which, he had always lived in Qiqian City. The hygiene there was excellent, and the air was good. When had he ever seen such a scene? The civilians and soldiers were rushing through the night without the conditions to take a bath, so it was reasonable that there were all kinds of smells on their bodies. This made Muda, the leader of the disciplinary investigation department, have an ugly expression. What made him even uglier was that he had already arrived at the entrance of Xiaojing City, but there was still no crowd to welcome him. Although Yang Chendong advocated that Yang Xie didn't like to do such things, but when he really came, there wasn't even a single person to welcome him. This made Muda angry. From his point of view, this was the new second army not putting him and the disciplinary investigation department in their eyes. "Humph, you better not have any problems. Otherwise, I will make an example out of you." After a flash of anger passed through Muda's heart, he covered his nose again. He raised his head and waved his hand as he led his 5 team members into Xiaojing City. In the new Second Army's headquarters, Xiaojing had just met with a passing 5-star army commander. They discussed how long they would stay here and how much food they would bring with them. After that, a soldier came to report that Muda, who claimed to be from Xi'an City, had arrived at the headquarters and wanted to meet with him. From Xi'an City, and he's a leader? After Sha Jing heard this, he quickly understood that this must be the group that was investigating him. He immediately said, "Let's go, lead the way." In the reception room of the military headquarters, Muda and his 6 team members had already found a place to sit down. After coming here, they could finally drink tea without having to smell the unpleasant smell. The 6 of them looked much better. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of hurried footsteps came from outside the hall. Then, Shibi, who was wearing a major general's uniform, walked into everyone's line of sight. The moment they saw the major general, the young men in the hall wanted to stand up. However, when their gazes landed on their leader, Muda, they realized that he did not do anything. They could not help but put their raised butts back down. Compared to a major general, they valued the identity of their team leader more. After all, that was the person who could decide their future. Of course, Muda also saw the departure, but because he was angry that the other party did not welcome him, he wanted to show him who was the boss, so he sat down and did not move. She slowly stood up when she was about 5 steps away from him. After he entered the hall, no one paid any attention to him. His heart skipped a beat. He had a feeling that the investigation team did not come with good intentions. Because Shibi had once betrayed the 5-star army, even if it was forced by circumstances, even if it was just an act, in many people's eyes, it was a fact, a part of history. Therefore, he felt guilty and did not reject the investigation team. However, the personal guard beside him didn't think so. Seeing that the 6 guests were still so arrogant even when the military commander was here, he couldn't help but be furious. He shouted, "The military commander is here. Don't you know how to stand up and welcome him?" Muda, who had already raised half of his buttocks, heard this and sat back down. He then said in an annoyed tone, "Oh, I didn't know that Commander she was so arrogant. I say, Commander, you won't punish us for not welcoming you, right?" Chapter 1232. Step down. Shibi had a premonition that something was wrong when the guard shouted those words. Seeing that Muda was indeed angry, he hurriedly scolded the guard. Then, he squeezed out a smile and took the initiative to bow and extend his right hand to Muda. "You must be team leader Muda. As the saying goes, a slap doesn't hit a smiling face." The other party was also a major general, so Muda couldn't go too far. He stood up a little bashfully and shook Shibi's hand. "I am Muda, the team leader in charge of this investigation. And, seeing that Commander Shibi is so travel-worn, you must be very busy." At this moment, Shibi didn't look travel-worn at all. He was wearing a brand new Major General's uniform and was abnormally clean. This was what he had just changed into. In his mind, since it was someone from Xi'an, then it was someone from the headquarters. He should treat them well. That was why he changed into a clean set of clothes. He didn't expect that this would cause Muda to misunderstand. However, Shibi didn't know this. He thought that Muda was being polite, so he told the truth. "It's normal for me to be busy. Just now, I met with a new logistics officer of the 5th Army to discuss the matter of food. That's why I came late." Shibi was naturally telling the truth. However, in Muda's ears, it wasn't the case. A major general actually lowered himself to meet with a regimental officer. Furthermore, he was in charge of logistics. Who would believe this? Muda's first impression was that Shibi was being perfunctory. "Oh, so you're saying that Commander she is really busy. A regimental officer can waste so much of your time. It seems that there will be battalion and company officers next. Does that mean that in the future, even a small soldier will need you to personally meet him?" Muda's words finally made Shibi feel that something was wrong. He originally thought that Muda was being polite. Now, it seemed that Muda was simply looking for trouble. No matter what, Shibe was still a major general. He was used to being dignified. The reason he lowered his head wasn't because of Muda, but because of City Lord Yu Qian. Now that Muda didn't believe him, why should he be polite? He immediately said with a straight face, "Team leader Muda, I don't know what you mean by this. Could it be that the commander couldn't meet the regiment commander? We are all soldiers of the 5-star army, and we are all ordinary members." In the words of the 6th young master, there is no distinction between high and low. The sudden counterattack stunned Muda. The 6th young master's words made Muda's expression turn ugly. There were not many people who could call Yang Chendong the 6th young master. Only some old Yangxia people and some important people could call him that. For example, Muda could only be called Bugnam of Gojoseon. This was the difference between them. While Muda was still in a daze, the second wave of attacks arrived. "Leader Muda, what you said just now is just a small soldier. I don't agree with that either. The reason why the 5-star army was invincible was because of the joint efforts of countless ordinary soldiers. There are no small characters among them, so please be careful with your words." It was a slap to the face. Initially, he wanted to show off his strength to the other party, but now, he was the one being taught a lesson. However, the parting words were extremely dignified and reasonable. Even if Muda wanted to refute, he couldn't. For a moment, he could only stand there with his face alternating between red and white. He knew that he would offend team leader Muda, but he was not afraid. He was confident that he would not be investigated. Of course, he wouldn't stick his warm face to some cold butt. He immediately turned around and left with the excuse that he was busy with work. She had only appeared for a short while before leaving. He did not even recognize the other members of the task force and did not even greet them. This angered everyone. Among them, Muda's assistant, Chang Wu, said angrily, "Humph. What was there to be proud of? Wasn't he just relying on his status as a commander? Even if you anger us, we'll still investigate you." Yes, investigate him properly. Didn't a dignified commander also do something like defecting to the enemy? At this moment, the other team members also shouted in unison. They had all grown up in Crimson City and had witnessed the process of Yang faction growing from nothing to power. Because of this, they shared the glory and felt that Crimson City being where it was today was inseparable from their hard work. It could be said that these people had already tied the glory of Qiqian City to themselves. This was also the result of Yang Chendong and Yu Qian's discussion. It was to let everyone have a sense of ownership. Only then, could they better protect and develop this place. Under this kind of education, it was extremely successful. Every time the news of the 5-star army's victory spread, the citizens of the city would cheer. However, if there was victory, there would be defeat. Just like when the new Second Army surrendered to Baiming, when this matter spread to Qiqian City, who knew how many people scolded Shibe for being an ingrate, and these few were among them. With preconceived notions, it would be strange if they had a good impression of Shibe. Even though the new Second Army returned to Yang Xie's embrace, in many people's eyes, it was just because they couldn't bear to part with him. Who asked Yang Xie to make the 5-star army so powerful? What else could they do if they didn't surrender? This was also the reason why the investigation team came to the new Second Army. Some of them suspected that Shibe was a disloyal person. In addition, the investigation team had just been established and they needed to establish their authority. What could be more influential than investigating a commander? Therefore, Muda came here with the intention of finding problems and finding fault with them. This kind of nitpicking goal was not to mention that the new Second Army had already gone through a period of turmoil. Even if it didn't, there would still be turmoil. That was the truth. After meeting with Shibe on bad terms, Muda and the others began to get busy. They used their authority to find many of the new Second Army's low-ranking officers to have a heart-to-heart talk. Although it was called a heart-to-heart talk, it was actually coercion and enticement. They took the initiative to guide the results they wanted. The commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Kong Ji, quickly found out about this matter. He originally wanted to go and tell Shiba about it, but after thinking about how his previous visit to Shiba was fruitless, he actually went straight to the 6th base in a fit of anger. He directly said that they were here to cause trouble, and had a huge argument with Captain Muda. Muda was put on the spot by a division commander. In a fit of anger, he found the members of the public security in Shaojing City. They had already received orders from Shaojing City to cooperate with the investigation team. Immediately, a team of 20 people walked out and went to the 1st Cavalry Division's headquarters to arrest Division Commander Kong Ji. It was naturally impossible for 20 members of the public security to do as they pleased in the headquarters. As soon as they entered the headquarters, they were surrounded by the guards. All the weapons in their hands were also taken away, waiting for Division Commander Kong Ji to deal with them. To everyone's surprise, Kong Ji actually let these people go and returned their weapons. Not only that, he also took the initiative to walk out of the headquarters with the 20 members of the public security. The moment he walked out of the door, he looked back at the door with a determined look in his eyes. Kong Ji was taken away in front of many officers in the headquarters. This news immediately reached Shibei's ears. He immediately rode to the investigation team's office. Unfortunately, he didn't even see Muda. Only his assistant, Chang Wu, stopped him. "Commander Shi, Kong Ji has a big problem. He is currently under investigation. Before the problem is solved, no one is allowed to see him. Please go back." After saying this, Chang Wu immediately asked the members of the public security team to close the door and shut Shibei out. After being given the cold shoulder, Li Xian's face turned extremely ugly. He swayed on the horse and fainted. Fortunately, the bodyguard beside him reacted quickly and caught him. However, because of this, Li Xian still fell ill. An army's work schedule was instantly affected when both the commander and the 1st Division commander couldn't work at the same time. The most direct result was that many soldiers, civilians, and food supplies passing through Shaojing City to Ili Lianli had to stop because of this. The longer they stopped, the more complicated the problem would become and harder to solve. The other officers of the new 2nd Army saw that the situation was getting out of hand and quickly notified the new 1st Army. In a sense, everyone was a military unit, but the new 2nd Army was under the management of the new 1st Army. In the headquarters of the new 1st Army, Tiger's Mane's face darkened when he heard about the new 2nd Army's situation. What the hell? Don't they know what time it is? The war in Ili Lianli is at a critical time. Why do they need an investigation team? That's right, Tiger's Mane. I think these people are just here to cause trouble. The Logistics Division Commander, Yang Si, also nodded and said in agreement. He was a practical person and admired people who did things. He hated it when people stabbed people in the back. No, Shaojing City is a transit battle zone. We can't let it fall into chaos. We have to send someone there to solve the problem there. Tiger's Mane shook his head and said as if he had made up his mind. Tiger's Mane, I'll go. Yang Si thought about it and took the initiative to volunteer. Most people wouldn't give face to people from Qiqian City. In the entire first city, only 3 people could give Qiqian Fu pressure. They were Tiger's Mane, Yu Mian, and Yang Si. Needless to say, Tiger's Mane was the commander of the new 1st Army and would soon be the commander of the new 1st Army. He was also Yang Chundong's study companion since he was young. No matter which identity he used, it was enough to give the people in the Qiqian City headquarters pressure. However, it was too flattering for him to meet an investigation team as Tiger's Mane. So it was not suitable. Yu Mian was Yu Qian's eldest son and was from Qiqian City. Of course, there was no problem. It was just that the literati's method of doing things was not decisive enough. What Shajing City needed now was a thunderous method to solve everything. It was not suitable for him to go. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.